Take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let me tell you a story.
Rain hammered against the hospital windows hard enough to make the glass tremble. Inside the private pediatric ward, everything felt painfully quiet except for the soft beeping beside 8-year-old Amara's bed. Diana sat forward in the chair so quickly she almost knocked over the paper cup of untouched coffee beside her knee. Her daughter's skin looked too warm, too pale. Tiny curls stuck against her forehead with sweat, while her small fingers twitched weakly against the blanket. A nurse adjusted one of the monitors near the bed, lowering her voice carefully. Her fever's still climbing. Diana nodded once. She had already figured that out from the way Amara stopped joking an hour ago. That scared her more than the machines. Usually, even during treatments, Amara still found little things to laugh about. Earlier that evening, she'd whispered, "Mummy, hospital jelly tastes like sadness." That little smile had disappeared now, and Diana hated how still the room felt. She grabbed her phone again, called Andrew. The line rang twice. Voicemail. Her jaw tightened. She called again immediately, straight to voicemail. For a second, Diana closed her eyes, not out of anger, out of exhaustion. Outside the room, London rain battered the streets while ambulance lights flashed across wet pavement below. 2:13 a.m. She checked the time, because somehow it felt impossible that the night was still going. Amara shifted weakly beneath the blankets. "Mom?" Diana leaned forward instantly. "I'm here, baby. Did Daddy say he's coming?" That question landed softly, but it hit harder than shouting ever could. Diana brushed damp curls away from her daughter's forehead carefully. "He's probably driving, sweetheart." It was a lie, and children always know. Amara gave a tiny nod anyway, like she was helping her mother pretend. That almost broke Diana right there. She stood suddenly and walked toward the hallway before her daughter could see tears forming in her eyes. The hospital corridor smelled like sanitizer and stale coffee. A tired doctor walked past, rubbing his face. Somewhere farther down the hall, a child started crying. Diana called Andrew again. This time he answered. Finally, relief hit her first, then confusion. There was music in the background. Soft music, laughter, glasses clinking together. Not traffic, not concern, not panic. Diana stopped walking. For a second, she said nothing. Andrew exhaled sharply into the phone, already irritated. "Diana, I told you I was busy tonight." Busy. Diana stared through the hospital window at rain sliding down the glass. Behind Andrew's voice, she heard a woman laughing softly, not loudly, comfortably, like she belonged near him. Diana swallowed once, slowly. "Andrew, your daughter's fever is at 104. Silence. Not shocked silence. Annoyed silence. Then a chair scraped somewhere near him. "Okay, but what exactly do you want me to do from here?" Diana's fingers tightened around the phone so hard her knuckles turned pale. Back inside the room, one of the monitors beeped faster for a moment. Andrew lowered his voice slightly, like Diana was inconveniencing him. "The doctors are there, aren't they?" She didn't answer immediately, because honestly, something inside her had just changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a door closing. A woman's voice drifted through the phone again, playful this time. "Andrew, are you coming back?" Diana heard it, and so did the silence afterward. When Andrew finally spoke again, his tone softened slightly. Not for his wife, for himself. "I'll come by tomorrow." Tomorrow. Diana looked through the glass toward her daughter's room. Small body, tiny hands, fighting sleep, because she was waiting for her father. And suddenly Diana realized something terrifying. Amara was no longer waiting for Andrew because she trusted him. She was waiting because Diana kept telling her to. That realization sat heavily in her chest. Andrew cleared his throat. "Diana?" She spoke quietly, very quietly. "Don't worry about it." Then she ended the call. No screaming, no accusations, nothing dramatic. That was what made it hurt. Diana stood there for several seconds staring at her own reflection in the dark hospital window. Tired eyes, wrinkled sweater, hair tied back carelessly. She looked nothing like the woman Andrew used to kiss before leaving for work. Back then, he used to call her beautiful almost every morning. Back then, he used to rush home just to eat dinner with them. Back then, he used to carry Amara asleep from the couch to bed, like she was the most precious thing in the world. Diana tried not to think about how long ago that version of Andrew disappeared. Inside the room, Amara's weak voice called again. "Mummy?" Diana wiped beneath her eyes quickly before walking back inside. Amara looked toward the doorway immediately. Hope first, then disappointment. Children try to hide it. They're terrible at it. Diana sat beside the bed and took her daughter's hand gently. Amara's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Daddy coming?" Diana opened her mouth. Nothing came out at first. That pause answered the question before she finally did. Amara looked down at the blanket quietly. No tantrum, no crying, which somehow felt worse. The little girl nodded once, like she understood something she was never supposed to understand at 8 years old. Then she whispered, "Okay." Diana looked away immediately because that single word hurt more than anything Andrew had said all night. And what Andrew didn't realize while sipping expensive wine somewhere outside London was that one missed night was about to cost him far more than his marriage. Andrew stood inside one of the most expensive hotel ballrooms in Canary Wharf, pretending not to notice people staring at him. The charity gala still looked beautiful from a distance. Crystal chandeliers, soft piano music, women in designer gowns, men shaking hands over million-pound deals while waiters floated through the room carrying champagne trays. Normally, Andrew owned rooms like this. People used to straighten their posture when he walked in. Investors chased his attention. Business magazines called him one of London's most influential property visionaries under 40. Tonight felt different. Nobody said anything directly. That was the problem. People kept lowering their voices when he walked past. A few men nodded awkwardly instead of stopping to talk. One woman from a finance firm smiled too politely before turning away mid-conversation. Andrew adjusted the cuff of his tuxedo slowly, trying to look unaffected, but his stomach had been tight since entering the ballroom. Because rich people rarely embarrass you openly. They embarrass you quietly. Across the room, 2 investors whispered near the bar. Andrew caught one sentence as he passed. Apparently the investigation goes deeper than they thought. The other man noticed Andrew nearby and immediately stopped talking. Too late. Andrew kept walking anyway. Face calm, jaw tense. That was the thing about public humiliation. The silence around it always felt colder than insults. Near the ballroom entrance, massive screens displayed logos from major sponsors. Months ago, Andrew's company logo used to dominate events like this. Tonight, it appeared smaller, lower on the screen, almost like people were already preparing for his fall before it officially happened. His phone buzzed. He looked down immediately. For half a second, hope appeared in his face, then disappeared. Not Diana, not Amara, his mistress, Vanessa. The message was short. "I think we need space right now." Andrew stared at the screen. Another message appeared seconds later. "This situation is becoming stressful." Stressful. That word almost made him laugh. A month ago, Vanessa loved private flights, shopping weekends in Milan, yacht photos, luxury spas, expensive jewelry. Now, suddenly, she needed space. Andrew typed, "Can we talk after tonight?" 3 dots appeared, then vanished. No response. For the first time in years, Andrew felt something unfamiliar crawl into his chest. Not anger, not embarrassment. Loneliness. Real loneliness. Not the kind money distracts you from. The kind that waits for you when the room finally goes quiet. A server approached carefully. "Champagne, sir?" Andrew grabbed a glass immediately, mostly to have something in his hand. Across the ballroom, cameras flashed near the charity stage, where several executives laughed together for photographs. Andrew recognized almost all of them. Men who once begged to work with him. Men who praised his leadership. Now they avoided eye contact. Funny how quickly admiration disappears once weakness becomes visible. Andrew loosened his collar slightly. The room suddenly felt warmer than before. That was when people near the entrance started turning their heads, one by one, quietly. Not because of him, because Diana had arrived. Andrew looked up automatically, and for a second, everything else in the ballroom disappeared. Diana walked beside one of the hospital foundation directors calmly, wearing a simple black evening dress that somehow made everybody else in the room look overdressed, elegant, composed, untouchable. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. That was what made people notice her. Andrew hadn't seen her like this in months. Not exhausted beside a hospital bed, not emotionally drained, not crying quietly in bathrooms when she thought nobody noticed. Tonight she looked steady again, strong again. and somehow that hurt more than if she'd looked angry. Several people greeted her warmly as she crossed the ballroom. People Andrew once considered his network, now smiling at Diana with genuine respect. Andrew watched one older investor shake her hand carefully, the same man who barely acknowledged her years ago. Funny how success changes people, but failure reveals them even faster. Diana finally noticed Andrew standing near the bar. Their eyes met briefly. No hatred, no bitterness, no dramatic tension. Honestly, that made it worse. She looked at him the way people look at old photographs, something that mattered once, something connected to another life. Then Diana gave a small polite nod, nothing more, and continued walking. Andrew turned slightly as she passed. Diana. She stopped, slowly, not emotionally, just respectful enough to listen. Andrew suddenly forgot every confident speech he'd ever given in business meetings, because none of those skills helped here. He cleared his throat. "How's Amara?" Diana studied him for a moment, before answering. "Better this week." Andrew nodded quickly, too quickly, like he wanted relief more than information. Diana noticed. Of course she noticed. She always noticed things. That used to be one of the reasons he loved her. Now it made him uncomfortable. Behind them, somebody on stage tested a microphone. Soft feedback echoed briefly through the ballroom. Andrew lowered his voice. "I've been trying to call." Diana looked toward the stage instead of him. "You usually call when something in your life goes wrong now." That sentence landed cleanly. No hostility, just truth. Andrew swallowed hard. For the first time all evening, he genuinely looked tired. Not wealthy man tired, not overworked tired, emotionally tired. There's a difference, Diana noticed. The dark circles beneath his eyes, the forced confidence, the tension in his posture. Months ago, she probably would have felt sorry for him immediately. Months ago, she would have tried fixing things. Now, she simply observed him quietly. Andrew glanced around the ballroom. People were still watching discreetly, waiting, curious, because wealthy circles love public collapse almost as much as they love success. Andrew rubbed his jaw once before speaking carefully. "Diana, I know things got complicated." Diana almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because some people use soft words when they're too afraid to say the ugly ones directly. Complicated. Such a gentle word for betrayal. Finally, she looked him directly in the eyes, and Andrew immediately realized something terrifying. She no longer needed him emotionally. That truth hit harder than losing money ever could. Diana's voice remained calm. "No, Andrew. It wasn't complicated." A long pause followed. Then she said quietly, "You just kept choosing yourself." For a second, the noise of the ballroom seemed very far away. Andrew looked down at the untouched champagne in his hand, because deep down, he knew she was right. And what Andrew still didn't fully understand yet was that losing his reputation wasn't the painful part. The painful part was realizing the only people who ever loved him without conditions were the ones he abandoned first. A few years earlier, before the hospital nights, before the missed phone calls, before another woman started answering Andrew's attention faster than his own family could, there was actually a time when people looked at Andrew and Diana and quietly thought, "Yeah, those two are going to last forever." And honestly, Andrew believed that too, which makes this story even harder. Because this wasn't one of those relationships built on lies from the beginning. There was real love here once. Real laughter, real effort, real tenderness. That's what makes betrayal hurt differently. Not when strangers disappoint you. When somebody who once made you feel safe becomes the person causing the pain. Welcome back to Mr. George Stories, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. If you're new to this family, thank you for joining us. Please hit the subscribe button because it helps us share stories like this on YouTube. And before we continue, I want you to comment below what destroys a family faster, cheating or emotional absence. Because by the end of this story, you may change your answer completely. Now the truth is, Andrew didn't wake up one morning planning to become the kind of father his daughter would cry herself to sleep over. People change slowly. That's the dangerous part. Sometimes the warning signs arrive quietly. A missed dinner, a colder hug, a shorter conversation, a husband checking his phone while his wife is speaking. Tiny moments, tiny choices, until one day, somebody you love starts feeling like a stranger sitting across from you. And Diana noticed the change long before she admitted it to herself. Wives usually do, especially women like Diana. Women who pay attention to energy instead of words. Women who notice delayed replies, forced smiles, distracted eye contact, affection becoming routine instead of genuine. Andrew still said, "Love you," but eventually, it started sounding like something he was crossing off a list. That shift stayed with Diana longer than she wanted to admit, because when you truly love somebody, you spend a long time trying to explain away behavior that's hurting you. At first, she blamed stress. Andrew's company had expanded aggressively across London luxury developments. Canary Wharf, Kensington, Chelsea. Money was pouring in faster than ever. Interviews, business dinner, private investor meetings, new wealthy friends. The kind of people who measured human value by watches, addresses, vacations, and who got invited into certain rooms. Diana hated those rooms immediately, not because she felt intimidated, because everybody inside them felt emotionally exhausted. Too polished, too fake, people smiling while insulting each other politely, women complimenting dresses they secretly hated, men shaking hands while planning how to outmaneuver one another financially. Andrew used to laugh about those people with Diana afterward. That was before he started becoming one of them. And maybe the saddest part of all this is that Diana didn't even care about the money. She would have stayed with Andrew in a tiny apartment if he'd remained the same man who once stood outside her hospital shifts in the rain holding takeaway food because he didn't want her going home hungry. That version of Andrew loved deeply. The newer version loved convenience. Big difference. And trust me, the moment you're about to hear was probably the first real crack in their marriage. Not the affair, not the lies, something much smaller, which is exactly why Diana almost ignored it. Rain-covered central London, in that soft gray drizzle, the city seemed famous for. Not heavy enough for umbrellas to fully matter, just enough to leave streets shining beneath headlights, while people hurried past each other pretending they weren't cold. Outside the Children's Hospital near Westminster, black luxury cars lined the curb one after another as photographers adjusted cameras beneath the awning near the entrance. Tonight's fundraiser mattered. Wealthy investors, medical donors, public figures, executives, everybody dressed beautifully. Everybody speaking slightly louder than normal. That fake polished energy expensive events always carry. Inside the main ballroom, soft jazz floated through the room, while waiters moved carefully between tables carrying tiny expensive meals nobody was actually there to enjoy. Most people came for visibility, not generosity. And Andrew understood that world perfectly. He stepped through the entrance, wearing a dark tailored suit that probably cost more than some people's monthly rent. Clean haircut, perfect posture, expensive watch, controlled smile. Everything about him looked intentional, because it was. A younger employee from his company walked beside him, nervously carrying folders. Andrew barely looked at the man while adjusting his cuff. Did the press receive the donation figures? Yeah, they confirmed 20 minutes ago. Andrew nodded once. Good. Not, how are the children? Not, who are we helping tonight? Just branding, optics, positioning. That was how Andrew viewed charity back then. Useful, necessary, profitable socially. The moment he entered the ballroom, several people immediately approached him. A financial director shook his hand too enthusiastically. Andrew, fantastic to see you. Another man laughed before Andrew even finished speaking. One woman touched his arm lightly, while complimenting his recent property acquisition like he'd personally solved homelessness. Andrew smiled through all of it, automatically. Polished, practiced, emotionally absent. Honestly, he looked comfortable. That was the scary part. People kept praising him. His intelligence, his business growth, his investments, his success. And Andrew accepted admiration the way most people accept weather. Expected, normal. Across the ballroom near one of the volunteer stations, Diana watched the entire performance while organizing donation envelopes beside a long table. She looked beautiful, not in the loud attention-seeking way many women at the gala tried to achieve. There was just something calm about her, warm, grounded, real. Her dark green dress was simple compared to the designer gowns surrounding her, but somehow she looked more elegant than most people in the room. Maybe because she wasn't trying so hard. One of the older volunteers leaned toward Diana quietly. That's Andrew Whitmore. Diana glanced over briefly. Okay, the woman blinked. You don't know who he is? Diana shrugged lightly while stacking papers. Rich man in London. That narrows it down to at least several thousand people. The older volunteer laughed unexpectedly hard at that. Unfortunately for Andrew, he heard it. Not the full conversation. Just enough. His eyes shifted toward Diana for the first time, and paused. Now normally women reacted differently around Andrew. More polished, more careful. Sometimes nervous, sometimes overly impressed. Diana didn't even look interested in pretending. That immediately caught his attention. Funny how quickly people become fascinating once they stop trying to impress you. A hospital administrator approached Diana holding a clipboard. We're short 2 volunteers near pediatric oncology. Can you help after the speeches? Of course. No hesitation, no performance. Just immediate concern. Andrew noticed that too. The gala host suddenly tapped a microphone near the stage. The room slowly quieted. People returned to their seats while cameras repositioned toward the front. Andrew took his place beside several executives near the center tables. Diana remained standing near the volunteer section, helping an elderly guest locate her seating card again. Andrew noticed, which irritated him slightly because he normally didn't notice people this much. The speeches began exactly how these events always begin. Polished sadness, carefully measured empathy, statistics delivered beside emotional piano music. Several donors received applause, Andrew among them. When the presenter announced his company's contribution amount, cameras immediately turned toward him. People clapped loudly. A few guests even stood briefly. Andrew smiled modestly while nodding toward the audience. Practiced humility. Very effective. Then the presenter said something unexpected. We'd also like to thank our hospital volunteers who continue showing up long after these cameras leave. The applause became softer, more genuine. Several volunteers looked uncomfortable being acknowledged publicly, Diana included. The presenter smiled warmly. One volunteer in particular has worked double shifts here while still helping organize tonight's event. A spotlight moved accidentally toward Diana for half a second. She looked horrified, real horrified, not fake humble horrified. The room applauded. Diana immediately shook her head. Please, don't do this to me. People laughed softly. Andrew did too, and for the first time all evening, his laugh sounded real. After the speeches ended, guests returned to drinking and networking, while volunteers continued working quietly around the room. Andrew should have been discussing investments. Instead, 20 minutes later, he somehow found himself standing near Diana's volunteer table, pretending he needed water. Diana looked up briefly. You know, rich people are allowed to sit down, right? Andrew smirked slightly. I'm taking a break from being admired. Must be exhausting. That caught him off guard. Not rude, just honest. Andrew picked up a bottle of sparkling water from the table. You always talk to donors like this? Only the dramatic ones. Again. He laughed harder than he meant to. Diana noticed immediately. Not the laugh itself, the surprise behind it. Most wealthy men she'd met spent entire conversations protecting their ego. Andrew suddenly looked like somebody forgetting to perform for a second. That made him more interesting. Andrew glanced toward the ballroom crowd. Several investors still watched him from across the room, waiting for him to return. Diana followed his eyes. They look stressed without you. I think they'll survive. That's optimistic. Andrew shook his head quietly. You really don't care who I am, do you? Diana continued arranging envelopes calmly. You want the honest answer? That sentence should have warned him. Instead, it pulled him in further. Andrew leaned slightly against the table. Always, Diana finally looked directly at him. Not impressed, not intimidated, just sincere. I think money helps people live comfortably. Andrew nodded slowly. Reasonable answer. Then she added, but children remember kindness longer. For the first time that night, Andrew stopped smiling completely. The noise of the ballroom faded strangely around him, not because the sentence was dramatic, because nobody spoke to him like that anymore. No agenda, no flattery, no manipulation, just truth delivered calmly. Diana noticed the shift in his expression immediately. For a second, Andrew looked oddly exposed, like somebody opened a window inside a room he kept locked carefully. Before he could respond, a small child from the hospital ward ran toward Diana holding a stuffed giraffe. Miss Diana. Diana immediately crouched down, smiling. Completely different energy now. Warm, playful, human. Why are you still awake? Nurses gave me apple juice. Diana gasped softly. Oh, no. That means you're unstoppable now. The little boy laughed loudly before wrapping his arms around her neck. Andrew stood there quietly watching the interaction, and something uncomfortable happened inside him. Envy. Not romantic envy. Something deeper. The kind that appears when you realize somebody else understands a part of life you've completely neglected. The child pointed toward Andrew curiously. Who's that? Before Andrew could answer, Diana said, probably Batman. Andrew blinked. Batman? Diana nodded seriously. Rich, serious face, expensive suit, clearly stressed. The little boy burst into laughter. And somehow, Andrew did too. The strange part wasn't that Andrew kept thinking about Diana afterward. The strange part was how often, because Andrew Whitmore was not the kind of man who became emotionally distracted easily. His entire life operated on structure, schedules, meetings, targets, efficiency. Even his relationships before Diana had followed patterns. Attractive women, expensive restaurants, controlled conversations, predictable endings. Nothing messy, nothing emotionally demanding. That was how he preferred life. Clean, organized, easy to manage. But 3 days after the fundraiser, Andrew caught himself staring out the window during a business meeting while one of his executives discussed investment projections, not because the numbers were boring, because he suddenly remembered Diana laughing when she called him Batman, which honestly annoyed him. He barely even knew her. Still, that sentence stayed in his head. Children remember kindness longer. Andrew leaned back slightly while the meeting continued around him. For some reason, he kept replaying the way Diana said it. Not emotionally, not self-righteously, just casually, like she genuinely believed it. Most people around Andrew talked about leverage, opportunities, image, profit, influence. Diana talked about kindness, like it still mattered in adulthood, and somehow she made it sound normal. One of the executives paused mid-presentation. Andrew blinked once. Sorry. Continue. But his focus never fully returned. That evening, his driver took him through Westminster traffic, while rain streaked across the windows of the car. Andrew loosened his tie slightly. Long day. Too many conversations. Too many fake smiles. His phone buzzed repeatedly with dinner invitations and investor messages. Without really thinking about it, he suddenly heard himself say, "Take me to St. Catherine's." The driver glanced into the mirror briefly. "The hospital, sir?" Andrew hesitated. Half a second, almost embarrassed by the answer. "Yeah." The hospital lobby looked quieter at night, less polished, less performative. No cameras, no wealthy donors pretending to care, just exhausted parents. Doctors moving quickly, coffee machines humming in corners. Real life. Andrew stood near the reception desk for a moment, wondering why this suddenly felt awkward. He could negotiate million-pound deals without blinking, yet somehow, walking into this hospital again made him strangely nervous. One of the nurses recognized him immediately. "Mr. Whitmore." Andrew nodded politely. "I was just nearby." Terrible lie. The nurse smiled anyway. "Visiting somebody?" Andrew paused. Good question. Before he could answer, a familiar voice spoke behind him. "Corporate Batman returns." Andrew turned immediately, and there she was. Diana wore navy blue scrubs tonight, with her hair tied back loosely while carrying patient charts against her chest. She looked tired, real tired, but still warm somehow. Andrew smiled before he could stop himself. That nickname's becoming disrespectful. "You survived." Diana continued walking toward the nurse's station. Andrew followed naturally, which she noticed immediately. "You lost?" "Possibly." "That's concerning. Rich people usually pay somebody else to be confused for them." Andrew laughed quietly. Again. Too easily. Diana noticed that too. One of the older nurses walking past raised an eyebrow at Diana subtly before disappearing around the corner. Diana ignored her, mostly. Andrew glanced around the ward carefully. Children sleeping. Parents curled awkwardly in waiting chairs. Machines humming softly. The atmosphere felt emotionally heavier than the gala night. More honest too. Diana placed the charts down near the station. "So what brings you here, really?" Andrew slipped his hands into his coat pockets. "I donated money. Thought I should at least see where it goes." Diana tilted her head slightly. That sounded rehearsed. Maybe slightly. Andrew watched her organize medication sheets carefully. Everything about Diana felt different from the women he normally spent time around. No performance, no calculation. Even her silence felt comfortable. That unsettled him a little. A little girl suddenly rushed toward Diana, wearing superhero pajamas and mismatched socks. Miss Diana. Diana immediately crouched. What happened to bedtime? The little girl pointed accusingly toward a nearby nurse. She said, "No more cookies." Diana gasped dramatically. "That's extremely serious." The child nodded firmly. Andrew stood nearby watching Diana negotiate cookie terms with the seriousness of a lawyer handling international peace talks. And before he realized it, he was smiling again. Not politely, not socially, actually smiling. The little girl suddenly noticed him. "Who's that?" Diana looked over her shoulder casually. "Batman." Andrew sighed. "This is getting out of control." The child stared at his suit carefully. "You don't look like Batman," Diana whispered loudly. "Budget cuts." The little girl burst into laughter. Even Andrew laughed, harder this time, enough that he briefly looked away afterward, almost surprised by himself. Diana caught that reaction immediately, and honestly, that was probably the first moment she became curious about him too. Not the businessman, the man underneath all the polished behavior. Because for a second there, Andrew didn't look wealthy or important. He just looked relaxed. The little girl eventually skipped away toward her room, while Diana stood again adjusting her badge. "You know, you smile differently here." Andrew looked at her. "Differently how?" Diana shrugged lightly. "Like your shoulders aren't trying to win an argument." That sentence caught him off guard. Again, Andrew leaned against the counter quietly. "You analyze everybody this much? Occupational hazard. Nurse thing? South London thing." Andrew smirked. "What exactly does that mean?" Diana folded her arms loosely. "Means if somebody's pretending, eventually we notice." Andrew should have disliked that answer. Instead, he looked weirdly interested. One of the nurses interrupted suddenly. "Diana, room 12 needs you." "Coming." She started walking away before pausing briefly. Then she looked back at Andrew. "You hungry?" The question surprised him. "What?" "Cafeteria downstairs still has food if you move fast enough." Andrew checked his watch automatically. Nearly 10 at night. He should have gone home already. Instead, he heard himself say, "Depends. Is hospital food always this dangerous?" Diana smiled slightly. Coward. 20 minutes later, Andrew sat across from Diana inside a nearly empty hospital cafeteria, eating chips that tasted aggressively average while Diana drank tea from a paper cup. Rain tapped softly against the windows outside. A tired janitor pushed cleaning equipment slowly through the hallway nearby. The whole scene felt strangely peaceful. Andrew loosened his tie fully now. Jacket off. Sleeves rolled slightly, less polished, more human. Diana noticed, "Wow. Look at that." Andrew glanced down. "What? You actually have elbows." The billionaire image is collapsing. Andrew laughed into his drink. Diana smiled to herself quietly, because rich men usually spent conversations trying to impress her. Andrew mostly looked relieved, not too. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Comfortable silence. Rare thing. Then Andrew asked softly, "Do you ever get tired of this place?" Diana looked around the cafeteria, then toward the pediatric ward upstairs. Her expression softened slightly. "Sometimes." She stirred her tea slowly before continuing. "But kids fight hard in here. Harder than most adults I know." Andrew watched her carefully. No dramatic speech, no performance, just honesty again. That honesty kept affecting him in ways he didn't fully understand yet. Diana pointed toward him suddenly. "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" Thinking too loudly. Andrew blinked once, then unexpectedly laughed again. And honestly, that laugh stayed with Diana long after his expensive car disappeared into the London rain later that night. By the third week of Andrew randomly stopping by the hospital, even the nurses had started noticing. Not because he acted obvious. Actually, Andrew tried very hard to appear casual about it. Too hard sometimes. One evening, he arrived carrying expensive pastries from a bakery in Kensington, like somebody who'd researched normal, thoughtful behavior online. Diana stared at the box for 2 full seconds before laughing. "You bought 12 croissants for hospital staff?" Andrew looked confused. "That's bad?" Andrew Half the night team survives on vending machine coffee and emotional damage. He frowned slightly. That sounds medically concerning. It's extremely concerning. One of the nurses immediately stole 2 pastries while pointing at Andrew. I like him. Diana rolled her eyes. Of course you do. He brought luxury carbohydrates. Andrew tried not to smile too proudly after that. Tried. The truth was simple now. Andrew kept visiting because of Diana. The hospital had stopped being the reason, and deep down, both of them knew it. Still, neither said it directly. There was something strangely enjoyable about the slow build between them. The teasing, the late-night conversations, the comfortable silences, the accidental lingering eye contact that neither acknowledged afterward. It felt adult, natural, not rushed, which was new for Andrew. Most relationships in his world moved quickly and meant very little. This felt different already. And Diana noticed something else, too. Andrew listened. Actually listened. Not politely waiting for his turn to speak. Not scanning the room for more important people. When she talked about patients, he paid attention. When she talked about growing up in South London, he asked questions. Real questions. One rainy Thursday night, Diana sat beside him in the cafeteria finishing yogurt, while Andrew complained quietly about a luxury investor dinner he'd attended earlier. One guy spent 40 minutes explaining wine, like he personally invented grapes. Diana nearly choked, laughing. No, I swear. What kind of psychopath memorizes fruit professionally? Andrew smiled into his coffee. God, she made him laugh easily. Too easily. Diana shook her head. Your rich people world sounds exhausting. Andrew leaned back slightly. And your world sounds loud. Diana pointed a spoon toward him. That's because you grew up around emotionally constipated British people. Andrew laughed hard enough this time that nearby nurses looked over briefly. Diana smiled immediately after, not because of the joke, because his laugh had changed recently, less controlled now. That mattered. Andrew shook his head. Emotionally constipated? You heard me. That's harsh. Am I wrong? Andrew opened his mouth, paused, then quietly admitted no. That answer surprised both of them slightly. Diana studied him for a moment. The cafeteria lights reflected softly against rain outside the windows, while tired hospital staff moved through the corridor nearby. For a second, Andrew looked younger somehow, less guarded. Diana rested her chin lightly against her hand. You know what your problem is? Andrew sighed dramatically. This should be good. You think life's supposed to be impressive all the time. Andrew frowned slightly. What does that mean? Diana shrugged. You overthink simple things. Everything has to sound important. That's not true. Andrew, you ordered sparkling water at MC Donald's once. Because the tap water tasted aggressive. Diana burst into laughter so suddenly, she nearly dropped her spoon. And honestly, Andrew forgot the rest of his sentence, because watching Diana laugh felt weirdly addictive. Not polished laughing, not fake flirting. Real laughter. Head tilted back slightly, eyes squeezed shut, warm. One of the nurses passing by muttered quietly, Yeah, he's finished. Diana heard it immediately. Andrew didn't, probably for the best. A few nights later, Diana stood near the nurse's station gathering her things after shift change, when Andrew appeared holding an umbrella near the entrance. You stalking me now? I prefer committed customer loyalty. Diana smiled despite herself. That sounded expensive. Andrew looked at her coat. You heading home? Unfortunately. He hesitated briefly before asking, Can I drive you? Diana narrowed her eyes immediately. You planning to kidnap me? Depends. What's your opinion on jazz music and organized investments? Wow. Threatening already? Andrew laughed quietly. 40 minutes later, his car moved through wet South London streets, while soft music played through the speakers. The city looked different here from Andrew's usual world, less polished, more alive. Chicken shops, still open late. Music leaking from corner stores. People standing outside laughing, despite the weather. Kids riding bikes too fast through side streets. Diana noticed Andrew watching everything carefully through the window. You look nervous. I'm observing. That's rich people language for nervous. Andrew smirked slightly. You insult me a lot. You recover quickly. She directed him through quieter residential roads lined with brick houses glowing warmly beneath streetlights. Eventually, Andrew pulled over outside a lively house where music could already be heard from inside. Andrew blinked. It's midnight. Diana looked confused. Exactly. Before Andrew could ask another question, The front door suddenly opened. Music burst louder into the street instantly. Reggae, laughter, voices talking over each other. A woman near the doorway spotted Diana first, then Andrew, and immediately shouted inside. Diana brought a white businessman. Andrew nearly laughed from pure shock. Diana covered her face instantly. Oh my God. Several heads appeared behind the doorway. Almost immediately, Andrew sat frozen inside the car. What's happening? Diana looked way too amused now. You're being inspected. By who? Everybody. Andrew stared at the crowded doorway. There are so many people. Yeah, we're loud. One older woman leaned halfway outside, pointing directly at Andrew. He looks expensive. Diana laughed so hard she bent forward slightly in her seat. Andrew looked genuinely terrified now, which made it even worse. Why are they all staring at me? Diana wiped beneath her eyes, still laughing. Relax, corporate Batman. This feels unsafe. You'll survive. Inside the house, music played while people talked over one another from every direction. The entire place smelled like spices, fried food, sweet rum cake, and something cooking slowly in the kitchen. Andrew barely stepped through the doorway before someone handed him a plate. Another person asked what football team he supported. Another asked if all rich people ate tiny food portions on purpose. Everything happened too fast. Andrew looked overwhelmed immediately. Diana noticed and smiled to herself quietly, because this version of Andrew was new. No polished control, no rehearsed confidence. Just a man trying very hard not to embarrass himself. And honestly, it was adorable. One older auntie pointed at Andrew suspiciously from the kitchen. Can he dance? Andrew answered. Honestly, probably not. The entire room exploded laughing. Diana nearly collapsed against the wall, laughing with them. And for the first time in years, Andrew realized something strange. Nobody here cared how much money he had. Not even slightly. They cared if he could laugh at himself, if he treated Diana properly, if he felt genuine. That was it. And weirdly enough, that felt better than every luxury gala he'd ever attended combined. After that night in South London, something between Andrew and Diana shifted quietly, not dramatically, not with some big confession or sudden kiss outside in the rain. It became softer than that, closer, like both of them stopped pretending this was casual. Andrew started looking for Diana automatically during his days. A message from her could improve his mood faster than successful meetings. That alone unsettled him, because Andrew Whitmore trusted structure, control, predictability. Diana fit none of those categories anymore. One Friday evening, Andrew waited outside the hospital longer than usual, while rain tapped against the windshield of his car. He checked the dashboard clock. 10 minutes, then 15. Normally he hated waiting. Tonight, he barely noticed. Finally, the hospital doors opened, and Diana stepped outside, adjusting her scarf against the cold. The second she spotted his car, she stopped walking, then shook her head slowly. Andrew lowered the passenger window slightly. Get in. Diana folded her arms. You know normal people don't collect nurses after work like this. I'm investing in healthcare. That joke was terrible. Still getting in? Diana tried hiding her smile before opening the door. The car smelled faintly like coffee, an expensive cologne, warm compared to the freezing London air outside. Diana leaned back against the seat with a tired exhale. Andrew glanced toward her briefly. Long shift? One kid threw applesauce at a doctor. Andrew nodded seriously. Honestly, understandable. She laughed softly while pulling off her gloves. God, that laugh was becoming dangerous for him. Andrew started driving slowly through wet city streets, while soft music played quietly in the background. For a while, neither spoke much. Comfortable silence again. That was becoming their thing, not needing to force conversation every second. Diana looked out the window, watching reflections move across rain-covered pavement. Then she glanced toward Andrew. You know what's weird? Probably several things. You don't act rich when nobody's around. Andrew smirked faintly. What does rich act like? Like they've never carried groceries before? Andrew laughed. That's unfair. Is it? He thought about it briefly. Okay, maybe slightly fair. Diana smiled to herself while resting her head lightly against the seat. She looked exhausted tonight, the kind of exhaustion that reaches your bones. Andrew noticed immediately. Without thinking much about it, he reached into the back seat and handed her a paper bag. Diana frowned slightly. What's this? Food? You bought me food? You forget to eat when you're stressed. Diana looked at him carefully now. That detail caught her off guard, because she never told him that directly. Andrew shrugged awkwardly. You do this thing during long shifts. What thing? You drink tea instead of eating actual meals. Diana stared at him for a second longer than normal, then slowly opened the bag. Her favorite chicken wrap from a cafe near the hospital. Still warm. For a moment she didn't speak, not because the gesture was huge, because he noticed people underestimate how intimate it feels to be noticed properly, especially by somebody who usually lives inside his own world. Diana looked down at the food quietly before speaking. You pay attention more than people think. Andrew kept his eyes on the road, only to important things. That sentence sat between them for several seconds afterward, heavy in a quiet way. Diana turned slightly toward the window again, mostly because she suddenly felt shy, which annoyed her a little. She was 27 years old, too grown to be acting nervous because a man bought her dinner. Still, Andrew affected her differently, and that scared her slightly. Over the next few months, they slowly became part of each other's routines. Not intentionally, it just happened. Andrew started visiting during Diana's late shifts, carrying coffee. Diana started texting him sarcastic updates during exhausting days. Sometimes he picked her up after work. Sometimes they walked through London together with no real destination. Those walks became Andrew's favorite part. No investors, no expectations, no performances, just wet pavement, city lights, and Diana talking about everything. Childhood memories, music, annoying coworkers, her family, dreams she never admitted out loud before. One evening, they walked across Waterloo Bridge, while cold wind pushed against their coats. The city glowed around them beautifully beneath the dark sky. Diana held hot coffee between both hands, while Andrew walked beside her quietly. She looked toward the river. Do you ever stop thinking about work? Andrew answered honestly. Not really. That sounds miserable. Probably is. Diana glanced at him. You know, you don't always have to be impressive. Andrew looked at her carefully. She said things like that often now. Little sentences that somehow reached places inside him other people never touched. He spoke quietly. Easy for you to say. Why? Andrew shrugged lightly. People expect things from me. Diana stopped walking. Andrew stopped too. Traffic moved behind them, while wind carried distant city noise through the bridge. Diana studied him for a moment, really studied him. Then she said softly, Andrew, who were you before people started expecting things? That question hit him harder than it should have, because, honestly, he didn't know anymore. And the frightening part? Diana could see that. For a second, neither spoke. Then Diana bumped her shoulder lightly against his arm. Come on, corporate Batman. Don't have an emotional breakdown on a bridge. Andrew laughed suddenly, a real laugh again, and without fully thinking about it, he reached for her hand. Diana looked down briefly, as his fingers intertwined with hers, warm, gentle, no games, no performance. The city kept moving around them while they stood there smiling quietly like two people accidentally finding peace in each other. Later that same night, Diana fell asleep on Andrew's couch after a brutal hospital shift. 1 minute, she was talking. The next minute she was completely asleep against his chest, while some old soul music played softly from the speakers in his apartment. Andrew looked down at her carefully. No makeup now. Hair slightly messy, exhausted, comfortable enough to sleep beside him completely unguarded. Something about that trust affected him deeply. He brushed a curl gently away from her face, very carefully, like he was afraid of waking her. Diana shifted slightly against him, but didn't open her eyes. Andrew stayed still after that, didn't even reach for his phone, didn't answer work emails, didn't move. For once in his life, success didn't feel important in that moment. Only this woman sleeping peacefully against his chest, while rain touched the windows outside. Weeks later, Diana stood barefoot inside Andrew's kitchen, wearing one of his shirts, while trying not to laugh. Andrew stared down at the disaster in front of him. Burned pancakes. Smoke rising slowly. Complete failure. Diana folded her arms. You own multiple properties in London, but lost a fight against breakfast. Andrew looked offended. Cooking instructions are aggressive. Andrew, you burned batter. The stove betrayed me. Diana burst into laughter again while reaching around him for the pan. Andrew watched her move around the kitchen comfortably now, like she belonged there already. That realization should have scared him more than it did. Instead, it felt right. Music played softly nearby, while Diana cooked properly this time. A slow, old-school love song filled the apartment quietly. Andrew leaned against the counter, watching her. Diana noticed immediately. "Why are you staring at me like that?" "Like what?" "Like you forgot your own thoughts." Andrew smiled slightly, then walked toward her slowly. Diana's breathing changed just a little. Andrew placed one hand gently against her waist, softly, carefully, like he was still learning her. Diana looked up at him quietly. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, warmer. Andrew spoke almost under his breath. "Dance with me." Diana laughed softly. "There's literally food cooking. It'll survive." That confidence worries me. Still, she let him pull her closer, slow dancing in the kitchen at nearly 1 a.m, while rain covered London outside. No audience, no performance, just warmth. Andrew rested his forehead lightly against hers, and for the first time in years, he felt emotionally safe enough to stop pretending he had everything under control. The wedding was smaller than most people expected. That surprised Andrew's business circle immediately, especially because wealthy London men like Andrew usually treated weddings like public investment opportunities. Huge venues, celebrity guests, magazine coverage, overpriced decorations people barely remembered afterward. Andrew could have easily done all of that. Instead, Diana convinced him to keep it intimate, not cheap, just personal. And honestly, Andrew shocked himself by agreeing. The ceremony took place at a beautiful historic venue overlooking the Thames, while soft rain touched the city outside like London itself was trying not to interrupt the moment. Diana walked down the aisle, slowly beside her uncle, while quiet gospel music played from a string quartet near the front. Andrew stopped breathing for a second when he saw her. Not dramatically, not movie scene dramatic, more like genuine disbelief. Because somehow, the woman who once mocked him for ordering sparkling water at MC Donald's was about to become his wife. Diana noticed the look on his face immediately after reaching the altar. "Why are you staring at me like that?" Andrew answered honestly under his breath. "I think I'm panicking." Diana smiled softly. "Bit late now." Several people near the front laughed quietly. That became one of the reasons people loved them together. They felt real, not polished, not performative, just emotionally comfortable around each other. Even during the reception, Diana kept disrupting the formal wealthy atmosphere accidentally. Andrew's investors tried discussing property markets with her, while she openly admitted she found most luxury apartments emotionally depressing. One older businessman blinked. "Depressing?" Diana nodded while sipping champagne. "Nobody actually lives in half of them." Andrew nearly choked, laughing beside her. The businessman looked horrified. Diana noticed immediately. "Sorry. Was that too honest?" Andrew leaned closer, quietly. "Extremely." She smiled without guilt. God, he loved that about her. The reception became louder as the night continued. Diana's South London family completely ignored the wealthy social stiffness surrounding them. Cousins danced. Aunties shouted across tables. Somebody changed the music unexpectedly. Andrew's business associates looked deeply uncomfortable during the transition from soft jazz into reggae. Diana noticed immediately, which only made her enjoy herself more. One of her aunties grabbed Andrew suddenly. "Come dance with your wife." Andrew looked genuinely alarmed. Publicly, the entire table burst into laughter. Diana held out her hand toward him. "Corporate Batman can survive one dance." Andrew sighed dramatically before standing. 5 minutes later, he was sweating visibly, while Diana laughed so hard she almost ruined her makeup. Even the wealthy guests eventually relaxed, watching them. Because despite all the differences between their worlds, the love looked genuine. That mattered. For a while after the wedding, life actually felt beautiful. Not perfect, real. Andrew bought them a stunning penthouse overlooking central London, with massive windows and views stretching across the city skyline. At night, the lights reflected against the glass beautifully, while rain rolled down the windows during storms. Diana loved sitting near the windows with tea after long shifts. Andrew usually worked nearby on his laptop, pretending not to watch her. One evening, Diana looked over suddenly. "You're staring again." Andrew didn't even deny it anymore. "You look peaceful." Diana smiled softly before resting her feet across his lap. Simple moments like that became their version of intimacy. Not constant grand gesture, comfort, safety, routine. Andrew started sleeping better beside her. That alone felt life-changing. Before Diana, his mind constantly moved. Deals, numbers, meetings, pressure, expectations. Diana quieted parts of him he didn't even realize were exhausted. Sometimes she danced around the kitchen while cooking. Sometimes she sang badly on purpose just to annoy him. Sometimes she dragged him away from work emails just to sit beside her watching terrible reality television. And somehow, Andrew loved every second of it. But marriage also brought them deeper into each other's worlds, which meant Diana slowly entered elite social spaces more frequently. That was where the discomfort started, quietly. At first, it barely looked harmful. Little comments, small reactions, the kind wealthy people make while smiling politely. One evening during a luxury gala in Kensington, Diana stood beside Andrew speaking with several investors and their wives near the champagne bar. One woman complimented Diana's dress with that overly careful tone people use when they're trying too hard to sound accepting. "You wear elegance so naturally." Diana smiled politely. "Thank you." The woman tilted her head slightly. "Where did you grow up again?" Andrew noticed Diana pause briefly. Not because of the question itself, because of the way it was asked. Diana answered calmly, "South London." The woman smiled tightly. "Really? You don't sound like it." There it was. Small enough to deny, sharp enough to feel. Andrew shifted slightly beside Diana. The woman continued quickly, "I just mean you're very polished." Diana took a slow sip from her champagne before answering. "My mother would be relieved to hear that after all the church lectures." Andrew almost smiled. Smooth, graceful, no tension. But Diana noticed the look exchanged between the women afterward. That look people think you don't see. The one that quietly says, "She doesn't fully belong here." Later that evening, another businessman spoke to Andrew while Diana stood nearby. "You're lucky. Beautiful wife." Andrew nodded politely. Then the man added with a grin, "At least you know she's not with you for your personality." Andrew's expression changed immediately, very slightly, but Diana noticed. The man laughed like he'd said something harmless. Wealthy men often hide disrespect inside humor. That way they can act offended if challenged. Andrew responded carefully. "Diana was unimpressed by my money long before she married me." The man smirked. "Sure." Diana touched Andrew's arm gently before the conversation could become awkward, not because she needed protection, because she understood these environments better than Andrew realized. Elite people rarely insult directly. They test boundaries quietly. Over time, Diana became very good at surviving those rooms. She learned when to smile, when to ignore comments, when silence embarrassed people more than arguments, and when wealthy insecurity disguised itself as superiority. Still, certain moments stayed with her longer than she admitted. One night after another charity event, Diana sat removing earrings slowly in front of the bedroom mirror, while Andrew loosened his tie nearby. Neither spoke for a while. Then Diana asked quietly, "Do your friends think I married you for money?" Andrew looked over immediately. "What?" Diana shrugged lightly. "Too lightly. Just asking." Andrew walked closer. "No." She looked at him through the mirror, not fully convinced. Andrew sighed softly. "Okay. Some people probably assume things." Diana gave a tiny nod, like she already knew. Andrew stepped behind her carefully. "But they don't know you." Diana smiled faintly. "No. They know exactly what they want to know." That sentence stayed in the room quietly afterward. Andrew wrapped his arms gently around her shoulders from behind. Diana rested back against him automatically. Comfort still existed easily between them then. That's important, because despite the social tension, Andrew truly loved Diana during this period. Deeply, he admired her intelligence, her warmth, the way she grounded him emotionally, the way she could walk into cold, wealthy rooms and somehow remain fully herself. Sometimes he watched her speaking with hospital families, or laughing with her cousins, and honestly wondered how somebody so emotionally open even existed. Andrew had spent most of his life around people performing success. Diana simply lived, and for a while, that felt like enough to protect them from anything. The first time Andrew heard his daughter cry, he completely forgot how to act. That surprised everybody, including him, because Andrew normally handled pressure well. Business pressure, financial pressure, public pressure. But standing inside that hospital room, while Diana lay exhausted against the bed, and their newborn daughter screamed with shocking strength against the nurse's chest. Andrew looked emotionally overwhelmed, not polished, not controlled, just stunned. The nurse smiled warmly. "Dad wants to hold her?" Andrew blinked once, like the question required legal preparation. "Right now?" Diana laughed weakly, despite exhaustion. "Andrew, she's not a bomb." "You say that very confidently, considering she's been yelling for 10 straight minutes." The nurse carefully placed the baby into his arms. Andrew froze instantly, one hand beneath her head, other arm stiff with fear. He looked terrified of breathing incorrectly. Diana watched him quietly from the bed, and honestly, she had never loved him more than that moment. Because the second Andrew looked down at his daughter, something in his face softened completely. No businessman, no social image, no performance, just awe. Tiny fingers wrapped weakly around one of his. Andrew swallowed hard. "She's so small." Diana smiled tiredly. "That's usually how babies start." Andrew ignored the joke completely. Still staring, still overwhelmed, their daughter blinked slowly before immediately starting to cry again. Andrew looked alarmed. "Why is she angry already?" Diana laughed softly. "Probably your personality." The nurse nearly laughed out loud before leaving the room. Andrew finally looked toward Diana again. His eyes looked suspiciously emotional now. Diana noticed immediately. "You crying?" Andrew shook his head too fast. "Absolutely not, Andrew. Hospital air is aggressive." Diana smiled so warmly at him then that Andrew had to look away for a second, because deep down, he already understood something terrifying. He loved this little girl instantly, completely. Weeks after bringing their daughter home, the penthouse transformed entirely. Suddenly everything revolved around. Feeding schedules, bottles, tiny socks disappearing mysteriously, exhaustion, lullabies, and Diana half asleep at random hours. Andrew adapted badly at first, very badly. One night, around 3 in the morning, Diana woke to complete silence from the baby monitor, which immediately terrified her. She rushed into the nursery only to stop in the doorway, trying not to laugh. Andrew sat in the rocking chair wearing wrinkled sweatpants while their daughter slept peacefully against his chest. His laptop rested forgotten on the floor beside him. One hand supported the baby carefully. The other held a children's book, upside down. Andrew looked up slowly. I panicked. Diana folded her arms, smiling. "About what?" She sneezed weirdly. Diana stared at him, then burst into exhausted laughter. Andrew looked offended. "You're underreacting." "Andrew." Baby sneeze. "Not like that." Diana walked over carefully before kissing the top of his head softly. "You're ridiculous." But she loved how seriously he took fatherhood. That mattered, because Andrew genuinely tried. He changed schedules around family time, came home earlier some evenings, ignored work calls during bedtime. Sometimes Diana caught him staring at their daughter, like he still couldn't believe she existed. Those moments stayed with her. One Saturday morning, Diana walked into the kitchen and immediately stopped. Andrew stood near the counter, holding several colorful hairbands, while their toddler sat in a high chair, aggressively eating fruit. Diana blinked. "What exactly is happening here?" Andrew looked stressed already. "I watched a tutorial." That sentence alone nearly finished Diana. Their daughter pointed proudly at her own hair. Andrew had attempted pigtails. Aggressively. One side sat dramatically higher than the other. The middle section somehow looked emotionally damaged. Diana covered her mouth, trying not to laugh too hard. "Andrew." He looked defensive immediately. The video moved too fast. Their daughter smiled proudly anyway. "Daddy did pretty." That tiny sentence destroyed both of them emotionally. Andrew softened instantly. Diana finally gave up trying to hold her laughter. She leaned against the kitchen counter crying with laughter, while Andrew pointed accusingly. No support. That's what this marriage lacks. Their daughter laughed too, simply because they were laughing. The apartment filled with warmth so naturally during moments like that. Real family warmth. Messy, loud sometimes, beautiful. One evening during an important video conference, Andrew sat inside his home office trying to maintain professionalism while speaking with investors. Everything looked polished on screen. Expensive office, city skyline behind him, tailored shirt, calm voice. Then the office door slowly opened. Tiny footsteps. Andrew glanced sideways. Too late. Their daughter climbed directly into his lap, wearing superhero pajamas and holding crayons. One investor paused mid-sentence, smiling awkwardly. Andrew sighed quietly. "Hello?" Their daughter whispered loudly. "Mummy said no cookies before dinner." Andrew muted his microphone instantly. "That sounds deeply unfair." Diana's voice floated from the hallway immediately. "Don't encourage her." Andrew grinned, despite himself. Their daughter grabbed his face dramatically. "Daddy, save me." Andrew looked toward the camera once, before completely giving up pretending to be serious. "Gentlemen, negotiations have become complicated." Even the investors laughed. After the meeting ended, Diana walked into the office carrying folded laundry. "You're teaching her manipulation already." Andrew looked offended. "She's gifted, naturally." Diana shook her head, smiling, while their daughter climbed across Andrew's shoulders like a tiny athlete. Watching them together made Diana feel safe then. That's important, because later, when Andrew emotionally abandoned his family, the audience must remember this version of him too. The father who once canceled meetings because his daughter had a fever. The husband who once danced barefoot in the kitchen holding his child against his chest while Diana cooked. The man who once looked genuinely happy just sitting on the floor building toy castles. Those memories matter later. One rainy evening, Diana stood in the kitchen cooking while old soul music played softly nearby. Their daughter sat on the counter swinging tiny legs while Andrew attempted to braid her hair again. Disaster. Complete disaster. Ow. Andrew looked horrified immediately. "Did I break it?" Diana laughed so hard she had to grab the counter for support. "Andrew, it's hair, not electrical wiring." Their daughter frowned dramatically. "Daddy, bad at beauty." Andrew looked betrayed. "That's harsh feedback." Diana turned around smiling. Andrew caught her watching him. For a second, neither spoke. The kitchen lights reflected softly across the apartment, while rain rolled against the windows outside. Simple moment. Simple happiness. Andrew quietly kissed Diana's forehead as he passed behind her toward the fridge. Small gesture. Automatic. Loved people do things like that, without thinking. Diana smiled to herself while stirring the pot slowly. Honestly, she believed this life would last forever. And maybe the saddest part of this entire story is that Andrew believed it too. The changes didn't arrive loudly. That's what made them dangerous. If Andrew had suddenly become cruel overnight, Diana probably would have confronted it immediately, maybe even fought harder sooner. But real relationships rarely collapse in dramatic, single moments. Usually, it happens quietly. One missed dinner at a time. One distracted conversation at a time. One emotionally absent evening at a time. And Andrew didn't even notice the distance growing at first, because success made distraction feel important. His company expanded aggressively across London. New developments, new investors, new partnerships. Suddenly, Andrew's schedule became crowded with international meetings, late-night client dinners, networking events, interviews, and constant pressure to maintain momentum. At first, Diana understood completely. She truly did. One night, she sat cross-legged on their bed folding laundry, while Andrew paced nearby speaking on his phone about a luxury property deal. Their daughter slept peacefully down the hall. Andrew looked exhausted already. Tie loosened, sleeves rolled, voice tense. "No, listen carefully. If the paperwork isn't finalized by Thursday, the investors walk." He rubbed his forehead while continuing toward the office. Diana watched quietly for a moment before speaking softly. "You've barely eaten." Andrew held up one finger while still speaking into the phone. Not rude intentionally, just distracted. Diana looked back down at the laundry again. Tiny pause. Tiny moment. Still, it stayed with her. Later that night, Andrew finally crawled into bed after 1 a.m. Diana half opened her eyes. "You okay?" Andrew exhaled heavily beside her. "Long day." Diana reached for his hand beneath the blankets automatically. Andrew squeezed hers once, but only briefly. His phone buzzed again almost immediately. Andrew pulled his hand away to check it. Diana looked at the ceiling quietly after that. Not angry, just disappointed. The next morning, he apologized without being asked. That was the thing. Early on, Andrew still noticed when he disappointed her. He kissed her forehead before work, promised things would calm down soon. Diana believed him, because she wanted to. And honestly, he probably believed himself too. For a while, the warmth between them still existed naturally. just interrupted more often now. One Sunday afternoon, Diana cooked, while their daughter colored pictures at the kitchen counter. Music played softly through the apartment. Normal family atmosphere. Andrew was supposed to be home hours ago. Their daughter looked toward the front door again. Daddy late? Diana kept stirring the pot slowly. Probably traffic. Another lie. Not huge. Still a lie. Their daughter nodded before returning to her crayons. But every few minutes, she looked back toward the door again. That part hurt Diana more than she admitted. Andrew finally arrived, almost 2 hours later, carrying shopping bags from an expensive department store, immediately smiling, too brightly. The kind of smile people use when they know they're guilty. Look what Daddy brought. Their daughter lit up instantly anyway. Children forgive quickly when they still feel safe. Andrew kissed Diana quickly on the cheek while setting bags onto the counter. I'm sorry. The meeting ran over. Diana nodded once, then noticed his expensive watch reflected restaurant lighting she recognized from Canary Wharf. Not office lighting, restaurant lighting. Again, she said nothing. Andrew noticed her expression immediately. What? Diana shook her head lightly. Nothing. That word always made him uneasy, because Diana rarely used it when something actually meant nothing. Dinner still happened. They still laughed. Their daughter still climbed all over Andrew while showing him drawings. From the outside, they probably looked happy. Maybe they even were sometimes. That's important too, because relationships usually break unevenly. Good moments continue existing right beside painful ones. One rainy evening, Andrew stood near the bedroom mirror, adjusting cufflinks, while Diana dried her hair nearby after showering. Their daughter already slept. Andrew checked his reflection carefully. Expensive dark suit, designer watch, perfect appearance. Diana watched him quietly through the mirror. Another dinner? Investor thing. You've had 4 investor things this week. Andrew sighed softly. Not angry yet, just tired. Diana, this expansion matters. I know. She said it gently. That almost made it worse. Andrew grabbed his coat from the chair nearby. Diana looked toward him again. You don't have to prove yourself every second. Andrew paused briefly, then gave a tired smile. Easy for you to say. There it was again, that phrase. Easy for you to say. As if emotional balance only existed because Diana didn't understand pressure. The truth? Diana understood pressure perfectly. She worked in pediatric healthcare. She watched parents break emotionally beside hospital beds. She held frightened children during painful treatments. She carried emotional weight Andrew's wealthy friends would collapse under immediately. But Andrew's world measured importance differently now. Money, growth, status, visibility. The higher his success climbed, the more emotionally distant he slowly became without realizing it. And Diana felt it long before she could explain it properly. Small things changed first. Andrew stopped dancing with her in the kitchen as often, stopped leaving his phone face down casually, started checking messages during dinner, started responding 1 second more than, I'm listening. One night, Diana sat beside him on the couch while their daughter slept upstairs. Andrew typed emails rapidly on his laptop. Diana rested her head lightly against his shoulder. Normally, Andrew would kiss her forehead automatically. Tonight, he barely noticed. Several seconds passed quietly. Then Diana spoke. Andrew, when's the last time you took a full day off? Andrew kept typing. Can't right now. That's not really what I asked. He finally looked over. Slight irritation now. Not huge. Still noticeable. What do you want me to say? Diana sat upright slowly. Nothing. Forget it. Andrew sighed heavily before rubbing his eyes. Immediately guilty. Diana. She shook her head softly. You're tired. But tired wasn't the full truth anymore. Andrew had started enjoying the attention success brought him. The admiration. The exclusivity. The rooms filled with wealthy people treating him like he mattered. And unfortunately, those rooms rewarded emotional detachment. The colder he became, the more powerful people considered him. One evening at a private rooftop gathering in central London, Andrew stood drinking whiskey beside several wealthy investors while city lights stretched behind them. Expensive conversations floated everywhere. Luxury watches, property numbers, vacation homes. One man laughed while discussing divorce settlements like business transactions. Another joked about avoiding his children by scheduling constant travel. Everybody laughed. Andrew laughed too. Not fully comfortable. Still, he laughed. That mattered. Across the room, Diana stood speaking with several women connected to the business circle. One woman smiled politely, too politely. "You must enjoy all this now." Diana frowned slightly. "All what?" The woman gestured subtly around the rooftop. "The lifestyle." Diana smiled faintly. "Honestly, I miss sleeping normally." A few women laughed, but another leaned closer. "You're lucky Andrew likes grounded women." Tiny pause. Tiny sentence. Still sharp enough. Diana held eye contact calmly. Grounded women usually save men from becoming unbearable. One woman nearly spit out her drink, laughing. The other forced a smile. Diana walked away afterward before the conversation could continue. She found Andrew near the balcony edge. He smiled automatically when he saw her. Still genuine then. Still some warmth left. Diana rested beside him, quietly looking over the city lights. For a second, it almost felt like old times. Then Andrew's phone buzzed again. He checked it instantly, and Diana noticed something subtle: the speed, the urgency, the way his entire attention shifted immediately. Andrew typed back quickly. Diana looked ahead toward the skyline instead of him. Soft voice, careful voice. "You've been somewhere else lately." Andrew looked over. "What?" "Even when you're here." He stared at her for a second, then smiled slightly. "Too quickly. You're overthinking." Diana nodded once, but deep down, that answer didn't comfort her at all. At first, Andrew told himself it wasn't serious. That mattered, because people like Andrew rarely wake up planning to destroy their families. Usually they build small excuses first, little private justifications that make selfishness feel reasonable. By the time the damage becomes obvious, they've already convinced themselves they deserve it. The first time Andrew noticed her properly was during a luxury property launch in Mayfair. Tall, glass building, private rooftop event, champagne flowing endlessly, music just loud enough to keep conversations feeling important. Most of the guests looked identical, emotionally, polished, ambitious, carefully attractive, constantly networking. Andrew normally moved through those environments effortlessly. Tonight he looked exhausted. 3 meetings earlier that day, argument with contractors, financial pressure building quietly beneath one of the company expansions. And before leaving home, Diana had asked him something simple. "Can you make breakfast with us tomorrow morning?" Andrew promised yes immediately, then forgot the promise less than 3 hours later. That should have bothered him more than it did. Instead, he focused on work. That was becoming a pattern now. At the rooftop bar, several investors surrounded Andrew discussing international expansion opportunities, while city lights stretched across London behind them. Andrew smiled through the conversation automatically, listening, calculating, performing success. Then somebody laughed nearby. Not loud, just effortless. Andrew glanced over briefly and saw her. Beautiful in the obvious kind of way wealthy rooms rewarded instantly. Elegant dress, perfect makeup, confident posture. The type of woman who understood exactly how attention worked. She stood beside several younger finance executives, speaking easily while one man practically leaned toward her every time she smiled. Andrew looked away almost immediately. Still, he noticed her again later, then again. Not because of emotional connection, because she represented escape. That distinction matters. Diana represented emotional honesty, family, responsibility, vulnerability, depth. This woman represented none of those things. And at that point in Andrew's life, part of him found that relieving. Near midnight, Andrew stepped away from the crowd briefly to answer another work call. Stress tightened visibly across his face while discussing delays connected to overseas investors. When the call finally ended, he rubbed his forehead heavily. "You look like you hate everybody here." Andrew turned slightly. She stood nearby, holding a champagne glass casually, relaxed, amused. Andrew gave a tired smile, only selectively. "That's healthy." He almost laughed. Almost. She stepped beside him near the balcony edge, overlooking the city. "Andrew Whitmore, right?" "Depends who's asking. Someone trying to decide if your reputation's accurate." Andrew raised an eyebrow slightly. "And what's my reputation?" She smiled into her drink. "Rich. Intelligent. Emotionally unavailable." That last part landed differently. Andrew looked toward her properly now. Most people in these circles kissed his ego constantly. She sounded entertained by him. Instead, that immediately interested him, dangerously. The conversation stayed light after that. No emotional depth. No vulnerability, just flirtation. Easy, surface level. And honestly, that simplicity became the attraction, because Andrew's real life no longer felt simple anymore. At home, Diana noticed everything. His daughter needed attention. Family required emotional presence. Responsibilities felt endless. Here, he only needed to look successful. That was easier. Weeks passed. Andrew kept seeing her at more events, private dinners, launch parties, business gatherings, always glamorous, always effortless. And slowly Andrew started lingering around conversations longer than necessary. Nothing physical happened initially. That's important. The emotional shift arrived first. One evening, Diana sat beside their daughter helping with homework, while rain touched the penthouse windows softly. The apartment smelled like food, still cooking in the kitchen. Warm, comfortable, real life. Andrew entered late again, loosening his tie while checking messages on his phone. Their daughter jumped up immediately. "Daddy." Andrew smiled automatically, before hugging her tightly. Still genuine. Still love there. Diana watched quietly from the dining table. "You missed dinner." Andrew kissed the top of her head lightly. "I know. I'm sorry." Then his phone buzzed again, instantly. Andrew looked down. Tiny pause. Tiny shift in expression. Diana noticed. Of course she noticed. "Work?" Andrew answered too quickly. "Yeah." Not technically a lie. Still dishonest. Their daughter pulled at his sleeve excitedly. "Daddy, look what I drew." Andrew smiled warmly while kneeling beside her. For several minutes, he focused fully on the drawing, while she explained every detail dramatically. Diana watched them together quietly, and honestly, that's what made the situation painful later. Andrew still loved his family. He just slowly started loving distraction too. One Saturday afternoon, Diana stood inside the kitchen blending seasoning while music played softly nearby. Their daughter danced terribly across the floor, making herself laugh. Andrew sat at the counter scrolling through emails, or pretending to, because every few minutes, his attention drifted back toward another message thread, another conversation, another source of validation waiting outside his real life. Diana looked toward him, suddenly. "You've smiled at that phone more than me this week." Andrew looked up immediately, half defensive already. "What does that mean?" Diana shrugged lightly. "Probably nothing." That answer irritated him more than direct accusations would have, because somewhere deep down, Andrew already knew something had shifted. Later that evening, they attended another luxury event together, near Canary Wharf. One of those painfully expensive rooftop restaurants where everybody pretends tiny food portions are emotionally satisfying. Diana wore a deep blue dress that made half the room stare when she entered. Andrew noticed proudly. Still possessive then, still connected to her. Several people greeted them immediately. Business conversations started. Champagne appeared. The usual wealthy performance. Then Andrew saw her across the room again. She smiled instantly after noticing him. Confident. Familiar. Already. Andrew looked away too slowly. Diana caught it. Not dramatically, just instinctively. Women notice energy first. Always. Throughout the evening, Andrew became subtly distracted, checking his phone, scanning the room, laughing slightly harder during certain conversations, emotionally drifting. Diana stayed graceful, externally, but something uncomfortable settled quietly inside her chest. Near the end of the event, Diana stepped outside onto the balcony needing air. Cold wind moved across the river below, while city lights reflected against dark water beautifully. A few seconds later, Andrew joined her. "You okay?" Diana folded her arms against the cold slightly. "Just tired." Andrew moved closer. "Still trying, then? Still wanting peace at home? You've seemed distant lately." Diana almost laughed at the irony. Instead, she looked toward the skyline. "That's interesting." Andrew frowned slightly. "What?" She finally looked at him directly. Soft expression. No anger, which somehow made the moment heavier. "I was about to say the same thing." For a second, neither spoke. Wind pushed lightly against Diana's hair while music drifted faintly from inside the restaurant behind them. Andrew looked at her carefully, and somewhere deep down, he felt the first real warning. Not about another woman, about himself. Because the frightening part wasn't attraction. Attraction happens. The frightening part was this. Andrew had started feeling emotionally relieved in spaces where nobody expected him to be a husband or a father. And he still hadn't realized how dangerous that mindset truly was yet. At first, everybody thought it was something small. That's usually how terrifying things begin. A fever that lasted slightly too long, constant exhaustion, random infections, their daughter getting sick more often than other children at school. Nothing dramatic initially, just enough little signs to slowly disturb Diana's instincts. And Diana trusted her instincts deeply. One cold November morning, she stood inside the kitchen packing lunch, while rain tapped softly against the penthouse windows. Their daughter sat at the counter, unusually quiet. No singing, no dramatic storytelling, no dancing around in socks while annoying Andrew before work. Just tired. Andrew noticed, too, while adjusting his tie near the coffee machine. "You okay, Bug?" Their daughter shrugged weakly. "Just sleepy." Diana looked over immediately, because sleepy wasn't normal for her. Usually mornings meant chaos, questions, jokes, missing shoes, serial negotiations. Today felt heavy. Diana walked over, carefully pressing the back of her hand against her daughter's forehead. Warm. Not dangerously warm. Still warm enough to bother her. Andrew glanced at the clock. Maybe keep her home today. Diana nodded slowly. "I already planned to." Their daughter frowned. "But I have spelling today." Andrew smiled softly before kissing the top of her head. "Trust me. Spelling survives." That small moment mattered later, because Andrew still sounded like a loving father then, still attentive enough to notice things, still emotionally connected enough to care. Over the next few weeks, the illnesses kept returning. Colds that lasted too long, low fevers, constant fatigue, one infection blending into another before she fully recovered. Diana tracked everything carefully. Medication times, temperatures, doctor appointments, patterns. She tried staying calm externally, but privately, something felt wrong. One evening, she sat at the dining table, reviewing medical notes, while Andrew worked nearby on his laptop. Their daughter slept early again upstairs. The apartment felt unusually quiet. Diana rubbed tired eyes before speaking. "This is the 4th infection in 2 months." Andrew kept typing briefly, then finally looked up. "What are the doctors saying?" Diana exhaled slowly. "They want more tests." Andrew frowned slightly. For what exactly? Diana hesitated, not because she wanted to scare him, because she didn't want to scare herself. Immune-related possibilities. That sentence changed the atmosphere immediately. Andrew closed the laptop halfway now. "Actually, listening. How serious?" Diana stared down at the paperwork. "I don't know yet." That was the worst part. Not knowing. Waiting. Watching your child still smile while fear quietly grows underneath everything. A week later, they sat together inside a private pediatric consultation room at the hospital. Rain rolled down the windows outside while muted hospital sounds echoed softly through the corridor beyond the door. Their daughter colored quietly beside Diana, completely unaware of the tension sitting between her parents. Andrew leaned forward slightly in his chair, jaw tight, one foot bouncing subtly. Diana sat unnaturally still. That was how Andrew always knew she was frightened. Stillness. The specialist explained everything carefully. Chronic immune dysfunction, ongoing monitoring, aggressive infection management, long-term treatment planning. No dramatic life expectancy speeches. No unrealistic television-style panic. Just medical reality. Complicated, exhausting, manageable with proper care. Still terrifying for parents. Especially parents hearing words like immune response, treatment cycles, vulnerability, specialist observation. Their daughter looked up suddenly during the conversation. "And the first dying?" The room went painfully quiet. The specialist immediately softened. "No, sweetheart. We're helping your body get stronger." Their daughter nodded slowly like she was trying very hard to be brave. Andrew looked away first. Diana noticed immediately, not because he didn't care, because he cared enough to feel overwhelmed. That distinction matters. On the drive home afterward, rain covered the city heavily, while traffic crawled through central London. Nobody spoke for a long time. Their daughter slept quietly in the back seat, holding a stuffed rabbit against her chest. Diana stared out the passenger window. Andrew gripped the steering wheel tighter than normal. Finally he spoke. "We'll get the best treatment available." Diana nodded faintly. "I know." Andrew glanced toward her. "I mean it." "I know, Andrew. Money." That was his language for protection. His instinct was immediately specialists, private care, elite treatment, resources, solutions. Diana understood why, but deep down, she already knew something else mattered too. presence. Children survive illness differently when they feel emotionally safe, and unfortunately, that was exactly where the cracks in their marriage started widening fastest. At first, Andrew attended every appointment, every test, every consultation. He asked detailed questions, researched treatments late into the night, canceled meetings to stay home during fevers. Diana saw him trying, genuinely trying. One night, she found him asleep beside their daughter's bed after monitoring her temperature for hours. Laptop open beside him, glasses slightly crooked, one hand still resting protectively near the edge of the blanket. Diana stood quietly in the doorway watching them both, and honestly, she felt hopeful then, because hardship sometimes pulls families closer together. For a little while, she believed that would happen to them too. But illness changes households slowly. Everything begins revolving around medical routines, medication alarms, fatigue, canceled plans, constant low-level anxiety sitting beneath normal conversations. Their daughter became emotionally clingier afterward, especially toward Diana. She wanted cuddles constantly, reassurance, bedtime routines, somebody nearby when she slept. Diana adjusted naturally. Motherhood took over instinctively. Her work hours changed. Sleep disappeared. Hospital knowledge became both a blessing and emotional curse, because she understood exactly how serious things could become. Andrew struggled differently, not with love, with helplessness. That was new for him. Business problems had solutions. Money created movement, control. But sitting beside your child during treatment while machines monitored her body, that kind of helplessness exposed parts of Andrew emotionally. He never learned how to manage properly, and instead of leaning closer emotionally, he slowly started escaping into work again. At first, it looked understandable. More meetings, more calls, more urgent business pressure. Diana accepted it initially because she knew fear affects people differently. Still, small moments started lingering uncomfortably. One afternoon inside the hospital room, their daughter rested against Diana, watching cartoons weekly, while Andrew checked emails beside the window. A nurse entered discussing medication adjustments. Diana listened carefully, asking questions immediately. Andrew nodded absent-mindedly, without looking up from his phone. Their daughter looked toward him quietly. "Daddy?" No response. Too focused on the screen. Diana glanced over. "Andrew." He looked up instantly. "Sorry." "What?" Their daughter smiled weakly anyway. "Nothing." Tiny moment. Still painful. Later that evening, Diana stood beside the hospital vending machine, rubbing exhaustion from her face, when Andrew approached, carrying coffee. He handed her one carefully. "You need sleep." Diana almost laughed. "Revolutionary medical advice." Andrew smiled faintly. For a second, they looked like themselves again. Tired, still connected, still trying. Then his phone buzzed. Andrew checked it instantly. Something shifted in his expression briefly. Tiny shift. Still noticeable. Diana watched him carefully. "Work?" Andrew slid the phone back into his pocket quickly. "Yeah." Diana nodded once, but something about the speed of his response stayed with her afterward. And deep down, even before she admitted it aloud, Diana was starting to feel something frightening. Not just fear about her daughter's health. Fear that Andrew was emotionally drifting away during the exact moment their family needed him most. The hardest part about emotional distance is that nobody outside the marriage notices it immediately. From the outside, Andrew and Diana still looked successful. Beautiful penthouse, private health care, expensive schools, charity appearances, family photographs during holidays, where everybody smiled properly. People saw money and assumed stability. They didn't see the silence growing inside the apartment. They didn't see Diana eating dinner alone more nights than not. They didn't see Andrew standing physically inside the room, while emotionally somewhere else entirely. And honestly, that kind of loneliness feels worse when you're married, because somebody is right there, yet unreachable. One evening, Diana stood in the kitchen stirring soup slowly, while their daughter sat wrapped in a blanket at the dining table, drawing quietly. The apartment smelled warm, comfortable, but the atmosphere felt tired. Their daughter looked toward the front door again, then toward the clock, then back toward Diana. "Daddy coming?" Diana kept stirring carefully. "He said he'd try." That answer had started replacing yes. Children notice wording changes quickly. Their daughter lowered her eyes back toward the drawing. A few minutes later, she asked softly, "Is work more important than sick people?" Diana stopped moving for half a second. Just half a second. Still enough to hurt. She turned around slowly. Why would you ask that? Their daughter shrugged beneath the blanket. Daddy always talks about work now. Diana walked over, immediately kneeling beside her chair. Your daddy loves you very much. The little girl nodded politely, but she didn't fully look convinced. That part terrified Diana more than she admitted to herself, because children slowly stop asking for people who disappoint them repeatedly. At 7 years old, their daughter had already started emotionally adjusting to absence, and that should never happen to a child. The front door finally opened. Nearly an hour later, Andrew entered looking exhausted while loosening his coat, phone still in hand. Sorry. Traffic was horrible. Diana looked at him quietly, not accusing, just tired. Their daughter brightened instantly anyway. Daddy. Andrew smiled automatically before hugging her tightly, and for a second, everything looked normal again. That was the confusing part. Andrew still genuinely loved his daughter, still kissed her forehead, still carried her carefully when she fell asleep on the couch, still worried during bad fevers, but emotional consistency had started disappearing, and children feel inconsistency deeply. During dinner, their daughter talked excitedly about school, while Diana served food quietly. Andrew listened at first, then his phone buzzed. He looked down automatically. One message, then another, then typing. Their daughter kept talking anyway before slowly realizing nobody answered her. She looked toward Andrew. Small pause. Daddy? Andrew glanced up. I said I got picked for art display. Andrew smiled quickly. That's amazing, Bug. But he looked back at the phone almost immediately afterward. Their daughter looked down at her food again. Diana noticed everything. The delayed reactions, the divided attention, the emotional absence, sitting right at the table with them. She continued eating quietly. No argument. No dramatic confrontation. Honestly, that almost made the atmosphere worse. Later that night, Diana stood inside the bathroom removing makeup, while Andrew changed clothes nearby. Neither spoke much. Finally, Diana asked carefully, "Could you maybe leave the phone downstairs sometimes?" Andrew looked up, immediately defensive. What? Just occasionally. He sighed heavily, already irritated. Diana, I'm managing multiple projects right now. I know. Then why are we having this conversation? She placed the makeup wipe down slowly before turning toward him. Because your daughter notices when you stop listening. That sentence landed harder than she intended. Andrew looked away first, not angry, uncomfortable. I'm trying. Diana's expression softened immediately. Because she believed him. That was part of the tragedy too. Andrew wasn't waking up trying to become a bad husband or father. He just kept convincing himself temporary absence was acceptable. Temporary, until absence became personality. One afternoon at the hospital, Diana sat beside their daughter helping organize colored pencils, while Andrew answered another call near the window. Outside, rain moved across London in soft gray waves. Inside the room, exhaustion sat everywhere. Hospital exhaustion feels different. Time moves strangely there. Slow, heavy, measured by medication schedules, doctor visits, temperature checks, waiting. Their daughter looked toward Andrew quietly. He faced away from them, speaking in low business tones. No. Move the meeting to Thursday. Pause. I don't care what legal says. Another pause. Their daughter whispered softly, Mummy. Diana looked down immediately. Yeah, baby? Daddy mad at us? Diana's chest tightened instantly. No. Why would you think that? The little girl shrugged weakly. He always sounds angry now. Across the room, Andrew continued speaking into the phone, completely unaware of the conversation happening behind him. Diana looked at him quietly, and honestly, for the first time, resentment brushed against her chest. Not explosive anger, something sadder, loneliness, turning slowly into disappointment. That emotional shift matters, because disappointment changes love differently than betrayal does. Betrayal shocks you. Disappointment slowly exhausts you. A few days later, Diana woke around 2 a.m. and reached across the bed automatically. Empty. She sat up slowly. Soft light glowed beneath Andrew's office door across the apartment. Diana walked there quietly. Andrew sat at his desk staring at financial reports, while whiskey rested untouched nearby. He looked exhausted, older somehow. Diana leaned against the doorway, softly. You coming to bed? Andrew rubbed his eyes. In a minute. Diana stepped inside carefully. "You've said that for 2 hours." Andrew gave a tired half-smile. "Monitoring me now? Somebody has to—" That joke barely landed. Andrew stared back down at the paperwork. Diana studied him quietly. His shoulders looked tense constantly now, jaw tight, eyes tired. He seemed emotionally restless, even at home, like the apartment no longer relaxed him the way it once did. Diana moved closer, slowly, placed one hand gently against the back of his neck. Normally, Andrew melted into touch immediately. Tonight, he barely reacted, still staring at numbers, still mentally elsewhere. That scared Diana more than arguments would have. She spoke softly. "I miss you." Andrew finally looked up, and for one brief second, real guilt crossed his face. Not irritation, not defensiveness, pain. He reached for her hand immediately. "I'm doing this for us." Diana nodded faintly, but deep down, something inside her whispered a frightening truth. People who are emotionally present rarely need to keep explaining why they're absent. Weeks passed. The apartment slowly changed emotionally. Longer silences, shorter conversations. Dinner getting cold while waiting for Andrew. Their daughter falling asleep before he got home. Diana sitting alone near the windows at night with untouched tea, while city lights reflected across the glass. One evening, she heard laughter from Andrew's phone while he texted someone beside her on the couch. Soft laughter. Female laughter. Quickly muted afterward. Andrew locked the phone immediately once he noticed Diana glance over. Tiny movement. Tiny reaction. Still enough. Neither spoke. The silence afterward stretched painfully across the room, and somewhere deep down, Diana finally started realizing the problem might no longer be only work anymore. By the time the countryside trip happened, Andrew had already crossed emotional lines he kept pretending didn't matter. Not physical ones at first, emotional ones. Private conversations, hidden excitement, deleted messages, moments he no longer shared with Diana because another part of his life had started forming quietly outside his marriage. And the frightening part? Andrew still kept telling himself he had everything under control. That's how people destroy their lives sometimes. Not through one reckless decision, through repeated selfish choices that slowly stop feeling wrong. That Friday evening, rain covered London heavily, while Diana adjusted her daughter's blanket carefully on the couch. The little girl looked pale again, too pale. Television light flickered softly across the room while a thermometer rested on the coffee table beside untouched soup. Diana checked her temperature again, still rising. Their daughter looked up weakly. "Daddy coming tonight?" Diana hesitated very slightly before answering. "He's away for work, baby." Another lie shaped carefully to protect her child from adult problems. Their daughter nodded quietly, then whispered, "Okay." Diana hated how often that word carried disappointment lately. Across the country several hours away, Andrew sat inside a luxury countryside hotel restaurant holding a wine glass, while warm golden lights reflected across polished wood walls. Soft piano music played nearby. People laughed comfortably around expensive tables. The atmosphere felt calm, effortless. No hospital machines, no medication alarms, no emotional pressure sitting on his chest every second, and that relief had become addictive. She sat across from him smiling, while discussing some ridiculous celebrity scandal from social media. Andrew laughed softly, relaxed for the first time all week. His phone buzzed against the table. Diana. Andrew glanced down immediately. Tiny tension. He let it ring out. The conversation continued. Another buzz. Another call. He exhaled quietly before turning the phone face down. "Everything okay?" Andrew nodded too quickly. "Yeah." Hospital stress. That answer should have bothered him more. Instead, he took another sip of wine. Back in London, Diana pressed a cold cloth carefully against her daughter's forehead while speaking to the on-call pediatric specialist through speakerphone. Her voice remained calm externally. Years of nursing trained her for that. Inside, fear moved heavily through her chest. Their daughter's fever climbed dangerously fast. Breathing slightly uneven now, too weak to joke. That scared Diana immediately. She reached for her phone again, called Andrew. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Her jaw tightened. The apartment suddenly felt too quiet, except for rain against the windows and her daughter's shallow breathing. "Mummy." Diana moved instantly beside her. "I'm here." Cold. Diana pulled another blanket around her carefully, hands moving automatically now, checking temperature, monitoring breathing, timing medication. Mother mode. Nurse mode. Pure survival focus. Still, she kept glancing toward her phone, waiting. At the countryside hotel, dessert arrived. Andrew barely touched it. His phone buzzed again, and again, and again. The screen lit up repeatedly beside his wine glass. Diana calling. Something uncomfortable moved inside his stomach now. Not panic yet. Annoyance, mixed with guilt. Because deep down he already knew this wasn't a casual call anymore. She rarely spam called him, especially not during work trips. He finally picked up the phone, not answering yet, just staring at it. Across from him, she noticed the shift in his expression. "Do you need to get that?" Andrew rubbed his jaw slowly, then made the decision that eventually destroyed everything. He pressed decline. Back in London, Diana stared at the screen in disbelief briefly before forcing herself back into focus. No time for anger now. Only her daughter mattered. 30 minutes later, things worsened quickly. Fever higher, breathing rougher, weakness increasing. Diana grabbed coats with shaking hands while calling emergency transport. Their daughter barely stayed awake while Diana carried her toward the elevator. Rain hammered violently outside the building now. Cold wind cutting through the streets. Inside the ambulance, blue lights reflected across Diana's exhausted face while she held her daughter's hand tightly. The little girl looked confused, scared, too tired to cry properly anymore. Diana kept speaking softly. "Stay with me, baby." Her daughter nodded weakly. "Okay." Diana tried calling Andrew again from the ambulance. Voicemail. This time, her eyes closed briefly after hearing it. Not heartbreak. Something colder. At the hospital, nurses moved quickly around them while monitors connected and medication orders started immediately. Diana shifted automatically into medical understanding despite being emotionally overwhelmed. Questions, vitals, observations, treatment response. Everything blurred together beneath fluorescent hospital lighting and exhaustion. Their daughter whimpered softly during one procedure. Diana kissed her forehead immediately. "I know, baby. I know." The child looked toward the doorway weakly, still searching, still hoping. "Daddy?" Diana swallowed hard. "He's coming." Another lie. This one hurt worse. Hours passed. The fever remained dangerously high. Rain continued smashing against hospital windows, while machines beeped steadily beside the bed. Diana sat forward in the chair, gripping her phone tightly. 2:13 a.m. She called again. This time, Andrew answered. Finally, relief hit first, then disappeared instantly, because behind his voice there was laughter, music, glasses clinking softly, warm hotel atmosphere, not urgency, not fear, not fatherhood. Andrew sounded irritated before she even spoke. "Diana, I told you I was busy tonight." For a second, Diana genuinely couldn't process what she was hearing. She looked toward her daughter, lying weakly beneath hospital blankets connected to monitors, then back toward the rain-covered window. Her voice came out quieter than expected. "Andrew, your daughter's fever is 104. Silence. Not shocked silence. Annoyed silence. Then Andrew exhaled heavily. "The doctors are there, aren't they?" Diana stared ahead. Something inside her started collapsing quietly. Not dramatically, not loudly, just finally understanding. Andrew lowered his voice slightly, probably because somebody sat near him. "Diana, what exactly do you want me to do from here?" That sentence changed everything. Not the cheating, not the lies. Because in that moment, Diana realized Andrew no longer viewed his family as responsibility tied to his heart. They had become inconvenience tied to his schedule. Behind Andrew's voice, soft female laughter drifted through the phone again. Comfortable laughter, intimate laughter. Diana heard it clearly now. And suddenly, every late meeting, every distracted dinner, every secret smile at his phone, every emotionally absent conversation finally connected together. Her grip tightened around the phone, not from jealousy, from disbelief. Because while his daughter fought through another dangerous fever in a hospital bed, Andrew was drinking wine with another woman. That realization felt almost unreal. Andrew spoke again, slight impatience now. "Diana?" She looked toward her daughter. Tiny body, beneath white hospital blankets. Weak breathing, curled fingers, waiting for her father. And honestly, Diana had never felt more alone in her entire life. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded emotionally exhausted. "Don't worry about it." Then she ended the call. No screaming, no insults, nothing dramatic, just silence. The kind of silence that appears when somebody finally stops expecting you to become better. Across the room, one of the monitors beeped faster briefly. Diana stood immediately beside the bed again. Her daughter opened tired eyes, slowly. "Mommy?" Diana brushed damp curls carefully away from her forehead. "I'm here, baby." The little girl looked toward the doorway again, still hoping. And what happened next stayed with Diana longer than the affair itself ever did. The hospital room felt smaller after the phone call. Not physically, emotionally. Like the walls themselves understood something painful had just happened there. Rain slid slowly down the windows, while machines continued their steady rhythm beside the bed. Everything sounded too loud suddenly. Monitor beeps. Footsteps in the hallway. Nurses speaking quietly outside the room. The soft rustling of blankets whenever her daughter moved. Diana sat beside the bed, holding her daughter's hand carefully between both of hers. The child's skin still felt too warm. Every few minutes a nurse entered, checking temperature, adjusting medication, monitoring breathing, offering careful reassurance. Diana responded automatically each time. Professional, calm, controlled. Years of nursing trained her body to function even when emotions felt shattered. But inside she felt hollow, not because Andrew cheated. Somewhere deep down, Diana had already suspected another woman existed before tonight. No. What destroyed her was something else entirely. Andrew heard his daughter was struggling in a hospital bed and still chose comfort over presence. That changes how you see a person forever. Their daughter shifted weakly beneath the blanket, eyes half open, voice barely above a whisper. "Mummy?" Diana leaned closer immediately. "Yeah, baby?" The little girl looked toward the doorway again. Hope first, then confusion. Because every few minutes she still expected Andrew to appear somehow. Children trust routines emotionally. Daddy comes. Daddy fixes things. Daddy shows up. Even after disappointment, part of them keeps believing. That innocence is heartbreaking to watch disappear. Her daughter swallowed weakly before asking quietly, "Did Daddy forget me?" The room went still. Not dramatic stillness. The horrible quiet that follows questions nobody wants to answer honestly. Diana opened her mouth. Nothing came out immediately. Because what exactly do you say to a sick child asking whether her father forgot her? How do you protect innocence without lying so much that trust eventually breaks anyway? Their daughter looked at Diana carefully now, waiting. Diana forced herself to smile softly, a mother's survival skill. Smiling while emotionally falling apart. "No, sweetheart." Tiny pause. Then she added carefully, "Daddy's just busy tonight." The little girl stared at the blanket quietly, small fingers tightening slightly around the stuffed rabbit resting beside her. No crying, no tantrum. Honestly, that made it worse. Children become quiet when disappointment starts feeling familiar. After several seconds, she whispered, "Okay." That word again, soft, polite, painfully accepting. Diana looked away immediately toward the rain-covered window, because tears finally burned behind her eyes. Not loud crying, just silent heartbreak sitting heavily in her chest. A nurse entered, quietly holding medication. She paused after noticing Diana's expression. Years in pediatric wards teach nurses how to read rooms instantly. The nurse lowered her voice gently. "How's she doing?" Diana cleared her throat quickly. "Fever's coming down slightly." The nurse nodded while checking the monitor carefully. Their daughter looked toward the nurse weakly. "My daddy works a lot." The nurse smiled softly. "That means he must be important." The little girl thought about that answer for a second, then quietly asked, "More important than me?" Diana closed her eyes briefly. Just briefly. The nurse paused too. Pain crossed her face before she answered carefully, "No job's more important than you, sweetheart." Their daughter nodded slowly, but she still looked unconvinced. That hurt Diana deeply because children usually believe reassurance instantly. Tonight, her daughter looked like she was trying to understand adult disappointment for the first time. No child should learn that lesson inside a hospital room. The nurse eventually stepped outside again, leaving the room quiet, except for the steady monitor sounds nearby. Diana brushed her daughter's curls gently away from her forehead. "Try to sleep a little." The little girl looked up weakly. "Will Daddy come tomorrow?" Diana hesitated. That hesitation answered everything before words even arrived. Her daughter noticed immediately. Children always notice hesitation. Diana forced herself to answer softly anyway. "Maybe." The little girl nodded faintly, then turned slightly toward the wall. Tiny movement, still devastating, because Diana recognized it instantly. That was emotional retreat, the beginning of protecting herself from disappointment. At 7 years old, hours later, the fever finally began lowering properly. Not safe yet. Better. The specialist explained medication response while Diana listened carefully, despite exhaustion pulling at every part of her body. Morning light slowly started appearing through the hospital windows, turning the rainy skyline gray. Diana hadn't slept at all. Her phone rested face down beside untouched coffee. No calls from Andrew. No messages asking for updates. Nothing. That silence said enough already. Their daughter finally fell into deeper sleep sometime after dawn. Diana sat beside the bed, studying her face quietly. Children look younger when they sleep. Smaller, more fragile, somehow. Diana reached out, brushing her thumb gently across the child's hand, and suddenly memories hit her painfully. Andrew teaching her to ride a scooter in the hallway, family movie nights on the couch, his terrible attempts at braiding hair, dancing together in the kitchen, bedtime stories read in dramatic voices just to make her laugh. That man existed once. That father existed once, which made this version harder to understand. Diana leaned back slowly in the chair. Exhaustion wrapped around her heavily now. Not just physical exhaustion, emotional exhaustion. The kind that appears when somebody you trusted completely becomes unfamiliar right in front of you. Around 8 in the morning, her phone finally buzzed. "Andrew." Diana stared at the screen several seconds before answering. Her voice sounded flat now, emotionally drained. "Hello?" Andrew sounded quieter this time, more careful. "How is she?" Diana looked toward the sleeping child. "Stable for now." Pause. Andrew cleared his throat softly. "I'm driving back." Diana didn't answer immediately, because honestly, for the first time in their marriage, his presence no longer felt comforting. Andrew spoke again. "Diana?" She finally answered quietly. "Okay." No anger, no confrontation. And somehow, that calmness unsettled Andrew more than screaming would have. He waited for more. An argument, maybe. Accusations. Emotion. Instead, Diana simply said, "She asked if you forgot her." Silence. Complete silence. On the other end of the call, Andrew stopped breathing for a second. Diana continued staring out the hospital window, while rain moved softly across the glass. Her voice remained calm. Too calm. "I didn't know what to tell her." That sentence hit Andrew harder than anything else ever had, because suddenly he pictured his daughter inside that hospital bed, asking for him while he sat drinking wine miles away, pretending responsibility was stress instead of love. And deep down, for the very first time, Andrew felt ashamed of himself. A month after the hospital night, Diana stopped expecting things to feel normal again. That realization arrived quietly, not through some huge confrontation, just through repetition. Andrew sleeping farther away in bed, conversations becoming shorter, phones staying locked, dinner turning into silence, broken only by cutlery, and polite questions about medication schedules. The penthouse no longer felt like a home. It felt like two exhausted people surviving inside the same expensive space. And somehow, the saddest part was this. Neither of them fully knew how to repair what had broken, especially because neither wanted to say the truth aloud yet. One rainy Thursday evening, Diana stood in front of the bedroom mirror adjusting earrings slowly, while watching Andrew through the reflection. He buttoned his tuxedo carefully near the closet. Perfect as always, controlled as always. Their daughter already slept after another difficult treatment day. Diana spoke without turning around. "Do we really have to go tonight?" Andrew paused briefly. Tiny pause. Still noticeable. "It's an important event." Diana gave a faint nod. Of course it was. Everything important lately seemed to happen somewhere outside their family. The gala took place inside one of the most expensive hotel ballrooms in central London. Crystal chandeliers reflected gold light across polished marble floors, while wealthy guests floated through the room dressed in expensive confidence. Waiters carried champagne. String music played softly. Photographers lingered near the entrance, capturing smiles designed more for newspapers than memories. The second Andrew and Diana entered together, several people immediately approached them. That used to feel flattering once. Tonight, it felt exhausting. A businessman shook Andrew's hand enthusiastically. "Andrew, been trying to reach you all week?" Another guest complimented Diana's dress, before immediately shifting focus back toward Andrew's latest business expansion. Diana smiled politely through it all, graceful, composed. Years of these events had trained her well, but tonight she felt emotionally disconnected from everything around her, especially Andrew. He stayed close physically, still touching her lower back occasionally, still introducing her properly, still appearing like a devoted husband publicly. That contradiction hurt, because emotionally, he felt miles away now. At one point, Diana stood beside a small group discussing charity fundraising, while Andrew spoke with investors nearby. One woman glanced toward Diana sympathetically. "How's your daughter doing now?" Diana softened immediately. "Better this week, thankfully." Another woman sighed dramatically. "I honestly don't know how you manage all that stress." Diana smiled faintly. "You adapt." The woman nodded before adding carefully, "At least Andrew can provide properly." That must help. Tiny sentence. Still uncomfortable. Diana had heard versions of it for years, as though financial support automatically erased emotional absence. She answered calmly, "Money helps treatment." Tiny pause. Then, "Presence helps children." The conversation quieted slightly afterward. Across the ballroom, Andrew noticed Diana speaking seriously and immediately felt tension tighten in his chest. Lately he hated conversations, turning emotional at public events. It embarrassed him now, not because he didn't care about his daughter, because he increasingly associated family struggles with emotional suffocation. That was the ugly truth he still refused to admit fully to himself. One investor beside Andrew laughed while sipping whiskey. "Married life still surviving?" Andrew forced a small smile. "Barely." The men laughed. Andrew laughed too, but the joke sat wrong in his stomach afterward, because part of him knew Diana would never joke about humiliating him publicly like that. A while later, dinner service began. Guests settled around elegantly decorated tables while speeches started near the stage. Diana sat beside Andrew quietly listening to charity presentations about pediatric treatment funding. Normally, this kind of event mattered deeply to her. Tonight she felt emotionally numb. Andrew checked his phone beneath the table repeatedly. Diana noticed every single time. She said nothing. That silence between them had become crowded lately. One of the charity directors eventually approached their table smiling warmly. "Diana, some of the hospital families were asking about you earlier." Diana smiled genuinely for the first time all evening. "Really? You made quite an impact there." Andrew looked down at his wine glass quietly, while the director continued praising Diana's volunteer work and emotional support with families. Several guests nearby listened with interest. One woman even said, "Andrew, your wife sounds incredible." That should have made him proud. Instead, something uncomfortable happened. Resentment. Tiny, sharp. Because lately, Diana's emotional strength reminded him of his own failures, and people praising her only made him feel more exposed beside her. The director eventually walked away. Silence settled at the table. Briefly afterward, Diana turned toward Andrew softly. "You okay?" Andrew exhaled heavily. "Can we not do this here?" Diana blinked once. "Do what?" "The constant emotional conversations." The people seated nearby suddenly became very interested in their wine glasses. Nobody looked directly at them anymore, which meant everybody was listening. Diana lowered her voice carefully. "I just asked if you were okay." Andrew rubbed his jaw tightly, already irritated, already defensive. Weeks of guilt and emotional avoidance sat underneath his skin constantly now. And unfortunately, people under emotional pressure often become cruelest toward the ones who love them most. Diana studied him quietly. No anger, just confusion that somehow made Andrew feel worse. One businessman near the table stood awkwardly pretending to check his phone before slowly walking away. Others followed gradually. The atmosphere shifted. Everybody felt it. Andrew leaned closer slightly, voice colder now. "You've become emotionally exhausting." The words landed softly, still brutal. For a second, the entire table went silent. Not exaggerated silence. The deeply uncomfortable kind where nobody knows where to look. Diana stared at Andrew quietly. No dramatic reaction. No tears. Honestly, That made the moment far more painful, because Andrew immediately realized she wasn't shocked by the sentence, just hurt that he finally said it aloud. Diana's fingers tightened slightly around the stem of her wine glass. Tiny movement, still enough to reveal pain. Andrew looked away first, not because he felt powerful, because shame started creeping in immediately. One woman across the table cleared her throat awkwardly. Another suddenly focused very hard on rearranging cutlery. Nobody wanted involvement. Wealthy people hate emotional honesty, unless it arrives packaged inside speeches or charity campaigns. Real discomfort ruins the atmosphere. Diana finally smiled politely. Soft, controlled, the exact kind of smile emotionally strong women use when they refuse to collapse publicly. I see. That was all she said. No screaming, no dramatic accusations, no scene. And somehow that restraint made everybody else at the table look more uncomfortable than she did. Andrew suddenly wished she would yell instead. Anger would have been easier. Instead, Diana simply sat back in her chair quietly, and after that moment, she barely spoke for the rest of the evening. Not to Andrew, not to the guests, not even during conversations directed toward her. She remained graceful externally, still smiling politely when necessary, still thanking servers, still listening during speeches, but emotionally, something had withdrawn completely. Andrew felt it beside her all night, the absence, the quiet distance, and for the first time since their marriage started breaking, he realized something terrifying. Diana might finally be getting tired of fighting for someone who kept emotionally abandoning her. The drive home from the gala felt colder than the rain outside. Neither Andrew nor Diana spoke much during the journey back through central London. City lights reflected across the car windows while soft jazz played quietly through the speakers. Normally Diana liked nighttime drives through London. Tonight, she stared out the window, like she wanted to disappear into the rain itself. Andrew gripped the steering wheel tightly. Several times he almost spoke, almost apologized, almost explained himself. But explanations felt useless now because deep down, he already knew the truth. You can't repeatedly emotionally neglect somebody, then suddenly fix everything with one conversation, especially not after humiliating them publicly. When they finally entered the penthouse, the apartment felt painfully still. No television noise, no music, just silence and distant rain against the glass. Diana removed her heels near the doorway carefully before walking toward their daughter's room without looking at Andrew. That hurt more than shouting would have. Andrew loosened his bow tie slowly while watching her disappear down the hallway. For several seconds he simply stood there alone. Expensive apartment, perfect city view, complete emotional emptiness. Their daughter slept curled beneath blankets, with one arm wrapped around her stuffed rabbit. Diana sat carefully beside the bed, brushing curls gently away from the child's forehead. That had become instinct now. Checking temperature, checking breathing, checking comfort. Mothers continue loving, even when exhausted. Andrew appeared quietly near the doorway several moments later. Diana noticed him immediately, but didn't turn around. Their daughter shifted slightly in her sleep. Tiny cough. Diana adjusted the blanket automatically. Andrew watched silently, and suddenly memories hit him harder than expected. Family movie nights, kitchen dancing, bedtime stories, tiny hands grabbing his face during morning cuddles, Diana laughing at his terrible braiding attempts. The emotional contrast made his chest tighten painfully, because somewhere along the way, home stopped feeling peaceful to him. And instead of fixing that feeling, honestly, he escaped from it. Andrew finally spoke softly. "We need to talk." Diana kept looking at their daughter. "Not in here." Her voice sounded calm, too calm. A few minutes later, they sat across from each other in the living room, while rain rolled heavily against the giant penthouse windows. The city skyline glowed behind them. Beautiful view, dead atmosphere. Diana held tea between both hands, though she barely drank it. Andrew leaned forward slightly on the couch, tense already. He spoke first. "I shouldn't have said what I said tonight." Diana nodded once. "Okay." No emotion. No argument. That unsettled him immediately. Andrew rubbed his palms together slowly. "I've been under pressure." Diana looked at him, finally. And honestly, the exhaustion in her eyes nearly broke him. Not rage, not hatred, just emotional fatigue. "Andrew," she said quietly, "our daughter has been in and out of hospitals for months." Tiny pause. "You think you're the only person under pressure?" That landed hard because she didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Andrew looked away briefly. Rain continued sliding across the windows behind them. Diana stared down into her tea, then finally asked a question both of them had been avoiding for weeks. Who is she? Silence. Real silence. Andrew's jaw tightened immediately, not because he planned to confess fully, because hearing the affair spoken aloud suddenly made it real. Diana watched him carefully. That hesitation answered enough already. She nodded faintly to herself, almost like confirmation hurt less than uncertainty. Andrew spoke carefully. It's not what you think. Diana nearly smiled at that. Not amusement, disbelief. People always say that right before explaining exactly what you think. Andrew stood abruptly, walking toward the windows. Defensive energy filled the room now. Nothing was supposed to happen. Diana looked at him quietly, but it did. Andrew didn't answer immediately, and again, that silence said enough. Diana leaned back slowly against the couch. For several seconds, she just looked tired. Not dramatic heartbreak. The kind of pain that arrives after disappointment has already exhausted you for months. She spoke softly. You left me alone in a hospital room with our sick child. Andrew closed his eyes briefly. Diana. No. Her voice remained calm, still controlled, which somehow made every word heavier. You heard she was struggling, and still stayed with another woman. Andrew turned toward her sharply. I didn't know it was that serious. Diana stared at him. Honestly, that sentence might have hurt more than the cheating itself, because their daughter should not need to be dying before her father considers showing up. Diana looked away first this time, toward the city lights, voice quieter now. You weren't there when she asked if you forgot her. Andrew sat down slowly after that. No defense left for several seconds. Only guilt, heavy guilt. But guilt without accountability changes nothing. Eventually, Andrew spoke again. Low voice. Maybe we need space. There it was. The sentence that officially broke the marriage apart. Diana inhaled slowly through her nose. Not surprised. Some part of her had already seen this coming after the hospital night. Still, hearing it aloud felt different. Permanent, somehow. She nodded once. Very small movement. Okay. Andrew frowned slightly, almost confused by how calm she remained. That's it. Diana looked at him carefully. What exactly are we fighting for right now, Andrew? That question stayed hanging heavily between them, because neither of them had an answer anymore. The next evening, Andrew packed quietly. No screaming. No dramatic destruction. No thrown objects. Honestly, emotional numbness feels colder than rage sometimes. The bedroom looked unfamiliar while he folded shirts into expensive luggage. Diana moved silently through the apartment, helping their daughter with homework like routine still existed. That normalcy made everything worse, somehow. At one point, Andrew paused while packing after hearing laughter from down the hallway. Their daughter giggled softly at something Diana said. For a second, he almost walked out there, almost stayed, almost chose differently. Then his phone buzzed. He looked down, and the moment passed. Their daughter appeared silently near the bedroom doorway. A while later, wearing pajamas and holding her stuffed rabbit against her chest. Andrew looked up immediately. The sight nearly crushed him. Because children somehow make adult failures look even uglier simply by witnessing them quietly. Their daughter stared at the suitcase first, then at him. Are you going somewhere? Andrew swallowed hard. Just for a little while. The child frowned slightly. Because of work? Andrew couldn't answer immediately. Diana appeared behind her daughter in the hallway. She didn't interrupt, didn't rescue him from the moment. This conversation belonged to him. Their daughter looked confused now. Did I do something bad? Andrew's face changed instantly. No. Never. He crouched in front of her quickly, hands trembling slightly now. This has nothing to do with you. Their daughter nodded slowly. But children blame themselves for separation more often than adults realize. That fear set visibly in her eyes already. Andrew touched her curls gently. I love you, okay? The little girl whispered softly. Then why are you leaving? For a second, the room became unbearably quiet. Andrew opened his mouth. Nothing came out immediately, because no selfish adult decision ever sounds reasonable when explained to a child. Diana stood frozen behind her daughter, watching Andrew struggle for words. And honestly, part of her heart still broke for him then, because despite everything, Andrew looked like a man watching himself destroy his own family in real time, while still lacking the emotional courage to stop. At first, Andrew told himself the separation was temporary. That mattered, because people behave differently when they believe they still have time to fix things later. He rented a luxury apartment in Canary Wharf, overlooking the river. Modern, quiet, impersonal. The kind of place designed for successful people who spent more time working than living. Everything inside looked expensive and emotionally empty, which honestly matched Andrew's mental state perfectly by then. The first few weeks after moving out felt strangely unreal. He still visited occasionally, still called his daughter, still asked about treatments, but the consistency disappeared. And consistency is what children trust most. One canceled visit hurts. Repeated disappointment changes how they love you. Diana noticed the shift immediately. Promises became, "I'll try." Something came up. "Maybe tomorrow," instead of certainty. Meanwhile, hospital appointments continued. Medication schedules continued. School absences continued. Life continued whether Andrew emotionally showed up or not. One rainy afternoon, Diana sat beside her daughter during another treatment session while answering emails from healthcare consulting work she'd recently started rebuilding quietly. Bills covered part of the table. Specialist costs, medication adjustments, private monitoring fees. Andrew still provided financially then, but less carefully, less responsibly. That change happened slowly, too. One evening, Diana opened a banking notification while preparing dinner. Her expression tightened slightly. Their daughter looked up from the couch. "Mommy." Diana forced a small smile immediately. "Nothing, baby." But it wasn't nothing. Andrew had reduced the monthly transfer without warning. Not dramatically, still enough to matter, especially during ongoing medical care. Diana stared at the screen quietly, while soup simmered behind her. No message, no explanation, nothing. That hurt almost as much as the reduction itself. Not because Diana depended entirely on his money, because it revealed where Andrew's priorities were shifting emotionally. Later that night, she called him. Andrew answered after several rings, sounding distracted already. Background noise, restaurant noise. Again, Diana closed her eyes briefly before speaking. "You reduced the transfer." Pause. Then Andrew sighed softly, like he already expected this conversation. "Cash flow's tighter right now." Diana looked toward the growing pile of medical paperwork beside her laptop. "Andrew, our daughter's treatment costs haven't become tighter." His tone sharpened slightly. Defensive now. "I'm handling multiple financial pressures." Diana stayed calm. "You posted yacht photos yesterday." Silence. Tiny silence. Still devastating, because both of them knew she was right. Andrew rubbed his forehead on the other end of the line. That trip was business-related. Diana almost laughed. Not humor, pure exhaustion. Everything's business-related now. Andrew's patience thinned immediately. "What exactly are you implying?" Diana stared out the penthouse windows at rain, sliding down the glass. The apartment felt lonelier these days. Quieter. Even their daughter spoke less sometimes. That frightened Diana deeply. She answered softly, "I'm implying our child should never feel financially secondary to your lifestyle." Andrew exhaled heavily. The sound of someone emotionally cornered by truth. "You act like I abandoned you." Diana didn't answer immediately, because deep down, that's exactly what it felt like. Not overnight abandonment, something colder, gradual withdrawal, like watching somebody slowly stop choosing their own family. Andrew spoke again, lower voice now. "I still care about both of you." Diana's eyes closed briefly. Caring and showing up aren't always the same thing. Then she ended the call. No yelling, no dramatic threats, just another exhausting conversation finished without resolution. Over the next month, the emotional contrast between their lives became impossible to ignore. Diana's world revolved around hospital visits, work rebuilding, medication schedules, school meetings, exhaustion, caregiving. Andrew's world looked completely different online. Luxury dinner, private events, weekend trips, designer hotels, expensive wine, smiling photographs surrounded by wealthy people, pretending life was effortless. One afternoon, Diana sat inside the hospital waiting area beside her daughter, scrolling through her phone absent-mindedly while waiting for blood work results. Then she saw it. Andrew photographed beside the other woman during some luxury rooftop gathering in Monaco, his hand resting casually against her waist. Relaxed smile, perfect lighting. The caption talked about, "Finally, taking time to enjoy life again." Diana stared at the screen quietly. Not jealousy, honestly. That emotion had already burned itself out. This felt worse, because while Andrew publicly celebrated freedom, his daughter sat beside her, connected to hospital monitoring stickers beneath her sweater. Their daughter looked up. What happened? Diana locked the screen immediately. Nothing. But children recognize sadness, even when adults hide it well. The little girl leaned gently against Diana's side. Small gesture, comforting her mother without fully understanding why. That nearly broke Diana emotionally. Meanwhile, Andrew's financial behavior became increasingly reckless. The other woman loved visibility, luxury, attention, status, and Andrew kept funding that lifestyle aggressively. Designer shopping, private travel, exclusive events, expensive gifts. Part of him knew it was unsustainable. Still, he kept going, because distraction had become emotional anesthesia. If he stayed moving fast enough, parties, work, travel, alcohol, attention, then maybe he wouldn't have to fully sit with what he'd done to his family. Unfortunately, reality catches people, eventually. One evening, Andrew arrived late to another hospital appointment he promised not to miss. Diana sat beside their daughter near the treatment room entrance, while nurses moved around nearby. Their daughter kept glancing toward the hallway every few minutes, still hoping, still waiting. Finally, Andrew appeared nearly 40 minutes late, wearing an expensive coat and smelling faintly like cologne and outside rain. Their daughter brightened instantly anyway. That unconditional love hurt Diana to watch sometimes. Andrew crouched beside her quickly. "Hey, Bug." The little girl hugged him immediately, then quietly asked, "Are you staying this time?" That sentence hit harder than she intended. Andrew looked stunned briefly. Diana looked away toward the corridor, because even now, part of her still hated watching him fail emotionally in front of their child. Andrew forced a smile. Of course. But his phone buzzed again. Less than 10 minutes later, he checked it automatically. Tiny movement, still enough. Their daughter noticed. Of course she noticed. Children always notice where attention goes. And for the first time since the separation, something painful shifted visibly across her face. Not anger, recognition. Like she was finally starting to understand her father might continue disappointing her no matter how much she missed him. That realization sat heavily in the room afterward. And honestly, that quiet disappointment from a child felt uglier than any argument Andrew and Diana ever had together. The strange thing about heartbreak is that life keeps moving. Even when you feel emotionally frozen, bills still arrive, children still need breakfast, medication schedules still matter, laundry still waits, morning still comes whether you're emotionally ready for it or not. And for a while after the separation, Diana moved through life almost entirely on instinct. Wake up, check temperature, prepare medication, answer emails, hospital appointments, school forms, sleep whenever possible, repeat. There wasn't enough emotional space left for dramatic breakdowns. Responsibility consumed everything. One cold morning, Diana stood inside the kitchen, wearing oversized pajamas, while packing lunch slowly for her daughter before school. Rain touched the windows softly. The apartment looked quieter these days. Different, not emptier, exactly. Just missing a certain kind of energy. Their daughter sat at the counter drawing, while eating toast carefully between medication reminders. Still softer than before emotionally. Still quieter sometimes, but healing. Little by little. Diana glanced toward her. "You feeling okay today?" The little girl nodded. "Can I wear my yellow hoodie, even though it clashes with literally everything?" Their daughter smiled faintly. "It's lucky." Diana walked over, kissing the top of her head softly. "Then, obviously, we're wearing it." Tiny moment. Still important, because despite everything, warmth still existed inside that home. Not perfect warmth, survivor warmth. The kind people build intentionally after disappointment changes them. A few weeks later, Diana attended a small healthcare consulting meeting near South London for the first time since reducing hospital work. Nothing glamorous, just professionals discussing pediatric support systems and community healthcare coordination. Still, sitting in that room again awakened something inside her she thought exhaustion had buried completely. Purpose, not motherhood, not survival, herself. One woman recognized Diana immediately after the meeting. "Wait, weren't you at St. Catherine's years ago?" Diana smiled politely. "Yeah." The woman's face brightened. "You helped my nephew during treatment." Diana blinked, slightly surprised. The woman laughed softly. "You used to bring him extra pudding cups because he hated hospital food." Diana covered her mouth, smiling. "Oh my God, He still hated peas? Passionately. Both women laughed quietly. And honestly, that conversation stayed with Diana afterward. Because somewhere between marriage problems, illness, abandonment, and survival, she forgot she mattered outside suffering too. People remembered her kindness, her intelligence, her presence, not just her pain. That realization became important. Slowly, Diana started rebuilding pieces of herself carefully, not dramatically, not through revenge fantasies, through routine, discipline, community, purpose. She accepted more healthcare consulting projects gradually, mostly flexible work connected to pediatric family support and hospital care coordination. The work fit her emotionally, because she understood families living under medical pressure deeply now, not academically, personally. One afternoon, she sat inside a small cafe near Brixton reviewing consultation documents, while soft Afrobeats played through the speakers. The smell of coffee and warm pastries filled the room. Outside, rain covered the pavement lightly. Inside, for the first time in months, Diana looked peaceful, actually peaceful. Her laptop remained open beside notes, while she answered emails calmly. No hospital machines, no waiting room exhaustion, no emotionally draining silence hanging over dinner tables, just work. Normal work. The waitress approached, smiling. "You want another tea?" Diana looked up, realizing she'd been working nearly 2 hours already. "Probably. Before I become emotionally attached to this chair." The waitress laughed. Diana smiled afterward to herself quietly. Tiny joke, tiny moment, still meaningful, because laughter had started returning naturally again. Not forced politeness, real warmth. Meanwhile, reconnecting with her family helped too. One Sunday afternoon, Diana brought her daughter to a South London family cookout for the first time in months. Music played loudly through the backyard while cousins argued over dominoes and aunties yelled cooking instructions. Nobody actually followed. The smell of jerk chicken filled the air. Their daughter sat wrapped in a blanket near the garden heater, laughing harder than Diana had heard in weeks, while older cousins taught her card games badly. That sound nearly broke Diana emotionally. Not sadness, relief. One auntie pulled Diana gently aside, while carrying plates toward the kitchen. "You look tired, baby." Diana exhaled softly. "I am tired." The older woman nodded, knowingly. Not intrusive, just present. "Still, you look stronger too." Diana looked toward the backyard, where her daughter laughed loudly, after accusing somebody of cheating at cards. Then toward the kitchen, where music and arguments blended together warmly. Home, real home. Not luxury, not status. People, support, presence. Diana smiled faintly. "I think I forgot who I was for a while." The auntie snorted softly. "That man didn't create you, sweetheart." That sentence stayed with Diana for days afterward, because heartbreak sometimes convinces people they lost themselves completely. The truth? Sometimes they just abandon parts of themselves trying too hard to save someone else. Over time, even Diana's appearance started changing subtly again. Not because she suddenly cared about impressing people, because emotional survival stopped consuming every ounce of her energy. She started dressing more intentionally again, sleeping slightly better, laughing more naturally, speaking with confidence during meetings, carrying herself differently. People noticed, especially Andrew. One afternoon, he arrived at the penthouse to pick up their daughter for lunch, after several canceled visits, finally followed by one successful appearance. Diana opened the door wearing fitted cream trousers and a dark sweater while holding consultation paperwork against her chest. Andrew blinked slightly. Not because she looked glamorous, because she looked emotionally steady. That unsettled him more. Diana stepped aside politely. "She's finishing homework." Andrew walked inside slowly. The apartment looked different too, lighter somehow. Music played softly near the kitchen. Fresh flowers sat near the window. Life had started moving again, without him. That realization hit harder than he expected. Their daughter ran out smiling. "Daddy." Andrew hugged her tightly immediately. Still love there, always love there somewhere. But while speaking to his daughter, he kept noticing Diana in the background, answering emails, discussing schedules calmly, moving confidently through the apartment, emotionally composed. No begging, no emotional dependence, no visible desperation for his attention anymore. That shift disturbed him deeply, because part of Andrew still believed Diana would remain emotionally waiting for him forever. And now, she looked like somebody rebuilding a life that no longer centered around his choices. Later, While their daughter grabbed her coat from upstairs, Andrew spoke carefully. "You seem better?" Diana looked up from her laptop. Tiny pause. "I'm trying to be—" Andrew nodded slowly, then glanced around the apartment again. The same apartment he once couldn't wait to escape. Now it suddenly looked warm in a way his luxury bachelor apartment never did. Diana noticed him staring toward the family photographs near the shelf. Old pictures, kitchen dancing, birthdays, vacations, bedtime cuddles, smiles from a version of their marriage that felt almost unreal now. Andrew looked away first. Diana watched him quietly, and for the first time since the separation, the emotional balance between them had started changing. Not through revenge, not through anger, through healing, and honestly, that frightened Andrew more than hatred ever could. The first sign something was wrong came from an email Andrew never expected Diana to see, not because he was hiding it from her intentionally, because during their marriage, Diana quietly handled more of his company's internal organization than most people realized. Andrew focused on investors, expansion, public image, negotiations. Diana handled operational structure, scheduling systems, internal communication organization, documentation oversight, administrative efficiency. Not officially, just naturally. Andrew trusted her competence long before he stopped appreciating it properly. And unfortunately for him, Diana remembered everything. One evening after putting their daughter to bed, Diana sat near the dining table reviewing consulting notes, while rain moved softly against the penthouse windows. Her laptop buzzed with an old automated company notification, still linked accidentally to a shared archive account from the marriage. Normally, she ignored those emails now. Tonight, something caught her attention. Repeated payment discrepancies, small at first glance, still strange. Diana frowned slightly before opening the attached financial summary. Then another. Numbers didn't align properly. Certain investment transfers appeared duplicated. Several expense reports looked manipulated. One development project showed losses hidden beneath adjusted reporting structures. Diana leaned back slowly, not panicked, focused. Because once you work around hospitals long enough, you learn something useful. Real danger usually announces itself quietly first. The next morning, Diana almost ignored the issue completely. Honestly, she had enough stress already. Medical appointments, work rebuilding, motherhood, emotional recovery. Andrew's business problems no longer belonged to her. Still, something kept bothering her. Not emotionally, logically. Andrew had become careless lately. Distracted, emotionally impulsive, and careless wealthy men attract dishonest people quickly. A few days later, Diana attended a healthcare consulting event near Canary Wharf. Professional atmosphere, clean conference rooms, coffee stations, people discussing systems and funding strategies. During a networking break, Diana unexpectedly recognized one of Andrew's longtime business associates speaking with another executive nearby. The moment he noticed Diana, his expression shifted awkwardly. Tiny shift, still noticeable. He approached carefully. "Diana, it's been a while." She smiled politely. "Yeah." The man hesitated briefly before lowering his voice. "How's Andrew holding up?" Interesting question. Not "how are you?" Not "how's your daughter?" Andrew, holding up? Diana studied him carefully now. Why wouldn't he be? The businessman immediately adjusted his expression. Too quickly. No reason. Just market pressure lately. There it was. Pressure? Diana had heard that word repeatedly around Andrew for months now. But tonight, something about it felt different, more serious. The businessman cleared his throat awkwardly. "Anyway, good seeing you." He walked away too fast afterward. Diana watched him carefully, and deep down, her instincts started waking up fully. That night, she reviewed more archived company files quietly after her daughter fell asleep. Not snooping emotionally, investigating logically. And the deeper she looked, the uglier things became. Risky overseas investments, manipulated reporting structure, financial movement, hidden beneath layered accounts. Unstable partnerships Andrew would normally never approve without extensive review, which meant one thing clearly. He stopped paying attention. Distraction had reached every part of his life now. Diana rubbed tired eyes slowly while staring at the screen, because the frightening part wasn't incompetence. Andrew was brilliant financially. The frightening part was this. He became emotionally arrogant. And arrogant people eventually stop listening when others warn them carefully. Suddenly, Diana remembered several moments during the marriage. Unanswered emails he dismissed. Tense late-night calls. Investors sounding frustrated. Financial paperwork left untouched. Rushed signatures. Constant emotional exhaustion. Back then, she assumed stress caused it. Now, she saw the bigger picture. Andrew had slowly abandoned discipline alongside his family. One evening, Andrew sat inside his luxury apartment staring at market projections while whiskey rested beside untouched dinner. His phone buzzed repeatedly with investor concerns connected to delayed reporting. He rubbed his forehead heavily, already irritated. Then, another message arrived. Urgent review requested. Andrew cursed quietly beneath his breath. Everything lately felt exhausting. Financial pressure, unstable partnerships, emotional guilt, public appearances, constant expectations. Even the relationship with the other woman had started feeling heavier now. Less escape, more maintenance. She wanted trips, visibility, reassurance, expensive experiences, public attention. Andrew funded everything aggressively, partly because distraction still felt easier than self-reflection. But money had started moving dangerously fast. Meanwhile, Diana kept uncovering more problems quietly. One hidden report especially disturbed her. A senior financial manager inside Andrew's company had been manipulating internal fund movement for months, possibly longer. The evidence wasn't fully complete yet, but patterns existed. Falsified reporting, redirected investment structures, concealed losses, inflated projections, and Andrew missed all of it. Because instead of leading carefully, he spent the last year emotionally escaping his own life. Diana sat silently near the dining table processing everything. Part of her felt angry. Another part simply felt sad, because this didn't need to happen. Andrew once noticed everything, once protected every detail obsessively, once built his company carefully with discipline and precision. Now, he looked emotionally reckless, and people around him noticed. One afternoon, Diana attended another hospital follow-up appointment with their daughter. While waiting near the pediatric corridor, she unexpectedly overheard two wealthy women speaking quietly nearby. They didn't realize who sat a few seats away. "I heard Andrew Whitmore's company might be over-leveraged." Another woman lowered her voice. "Apparently, investors are nervous." "Well, he's been acting unstable for months." Diana stared down at her coffee silently, while her daughter colored beside her. The women continued whispering. Honestly, leaving his family the way he did already looked terrible. "Money makes people stupid." Diana looked toward her daughter immediately after hearing that sentence. The little girl remained focused on crayons, thankfully. Still, something shifted inside Diana then, because suddenly, she understood something clearly. Andrew's collapse had already started publicly. He just hadn't realized it yet. Later that evening, Diana sat alone near the windows after putting her daughter to sleep. London glowed outside beneath soft rain while financial documents remained spread across the table nearby. The evidence looked increasingly serious now. Not dramatic criminal mastermind behavior, realistic corporate fraud. The dangerous kind wealthy companies sometimes ignore until everything explodes publicly. Diana leaned back, slowly closing tired eyes. And honestly, for the first time since the separation, she stopped seeing Andrew only as the man who hurt her emotionally. Now she also saw a man actively destroying his own future, while surrounded by people too selfish to stop him. Diana didn't rush. That's what made her dangerous. Angry people act fast. Emotionally intelligent people observe first. And after everything Andrew had done, Diana understood something clearly now. If she reacted emotionally, people in Andrew's world would dismiss her as bitter, emotional, vindictive, the angry ex-wife. She refused to give them that satisfaction. So instead, she became careful, methodical, quiet. One rainy evening, after putting their daughter to bed, Diana sat alone at the dining table reviewing printed financial reports, while soft jazz played quietly through the apartment. The city lights reflected across the windows behind her. Several folders remained organized carefully beside her laptop. Investment records, internal reporting discrepancies, archived company emails, Partnership structures, transaction summaries, nothing stolen illegally, nothing dramatic. Only documented inconsistencies connected to information she legitimately accessed during years, helping organize parts of Andrew's operational structure. Diana highlighted another suspicious transfer slowly, then stopped, exhaled. Not revenge, protection. That distinction mattered deeply to her, because despite everything, Andrew was still her daughter's father. She didn't want destruction. She wanted truth handled properly before innocent people got hurt financially, including her child. The next week, Diana quietly contacted a corporate legal consultant through a healthcare board connection she trusted professionally. Not gossip, not emotional storytelling. Facts. The meeting took place inside a small office near Holborn on a gray London afternoon. Professional atmosphere. No dramatic music, no revenge speeches, just paperwork and careful questions. The consultant adjusted glasses while reviewing documents. Where exactly did you obtain these records? Diana answered calmly. Archived internal organizational access from during my marriage. The consultant nodded, slowly continuing through the paperwork. Minutes passed quietly. Then he finally looked up, expression serious now. These discrepancies are significant. Diana remained still. That's what worried me. The consultant folded his hands carefully. You understand this could trigger formal financial investigation? Tiny pause. Diana looked toward the rain outside the office window briefly before answering. If there's fraud happening inside that company, ignoring it helps nobody. That answer mattered, because Diana's motivation remained emotionally grounded in responsibility, not destruction. The consultant continued reviewing files. You said your husband hasn't addressed these concerns internally? Diana nodded faintly. I don't think he fully realizes how bad things are. That sentence carried more sadness than anger, because deep down, Diana understood Andrew wasn't some criminal mastermind. He was distracted, emotionally reckless, surrounded by people benefiting from his arrogance. And now those same people were quietly taking advantage of his absence. Over the following weeks, Diana became extremely disciplined emotionally. No public accusations, no vague social media posts, no dramatic confrontations, nothing. She continued, caring for her daughter, attending consulting meetings, rebuilding her career, maintaining stability at home. Meanwhile, quietly, she gathered documentation properly. One evening, Andrew called unexpectedly, while Diana prepared medication reminders in the kitchen. His voice sounded exhausted immediately. You busy? Diana balanced the phone between shoulder and ear. Always. Small silence. Not hostile. Just unfamiliar now. Andrew rubbed his jaw on the other end. Can I ask you something? Depends. He exhaled quietly. Have you heard anything about my company? Interesting question. Diana leaned against the counter, slowly. What kind of things? Andrew hesitated. That alone told her enough already. Investor concerns. Internal pressure. Diana looked toward her daughter's bedroom, down the hallway, before answering carefully. Andrew, when's the last time you fully reviewed your internal financial structures yourself? Silence. Longer this time. Andrew's voice lowered slightly. Why are you asking me that? Diana closed her eyes briefly. Part of her still wanted him to wake up before everything collapsed publicly. Despite everything, that complicated love doesn't disappear instantly after marriage ends. She answered softly, because I think you stopped paying attention to the wrong people. Andrew sat heavily into a chair inside his apartment. The city skyline stretched behind him, cold and distant through giant windows. Several whiskey glasses sat unfinished nearby. He looked exhausted lately, not physically, morally, emotionally. Life had started slipping beyond his control quietly, and for the first time in years, Andrew felt genuinely afraid. Do you know something? Diana stared down at the medication chart in front of her, then answered honestly. I know you've changed. Andrew closed his eyes immediately after hearing that, because somehow that sentence hurt worse than accusations about money ever could. Diana continued gently. The old version of you would have caught this months ago. That silence afterward felt heavy, not hateful, grieving. Andrew spoke quietly. You think I ruined everything. Diana looked toward the dark kitchen window, reflecting her tired face, then toward family photos still standing near the shelves. Birthdays, hospital recovery smiles, kitchen dancing, happier years. she answered carefully. I think you stopped protecting what mattered. Andrew didn't respond immediately, because deep down, he knew she was right. A few days later, Diana attended another meeting with legal and financial professionals. This time the atmosphere felt more serious. The evidence trail had expanded, manipulated reporting, concealed liabilities, unauthorized fund movement, reckless investment exposure, enough to justify formal inquiry. The consultant spoke carefully. Once this process begins, public exposure becomes likely. Diana nodded slowly. No excitement, no satisfaction, just acceptance. Do what's legally necessary. The consultant studied her briefly, probably expecting bitterness. Instead, Diana simply looked emotionally tired. That difference mattered, because true strength rarely performs itself loudly. After the meeting, Diana walked alone through rainy London streets, while traffic lights reflected across wet pavement. Cold wind moved through the city. People hurried past, carrying umbrellas and coffee cups and ordinary problems. Diana stopped briefly outside a cafe window, staring at her reflection. Months ago, she barely recognized herself anymore. Exhausted wife, abandoned mother, emotionally drowning. Now, still tired, still healing, but clearer, stronger, more emotionally grounded. Not because pain disappeared, because she survived it without losing herself completely. Meanwhile, Andrew's world kept tightening around him. Investors requested urgent meetings. Calls went unanswered longer. Financial partners sounded tense, and the people surrounding him socially had already started shifting subtly. Fewer invitations, colder conversations, delayed responses, careful distance. The wealthy world loves success publicly. Failure makes people suddenly very busy. One night, Andrew arrived at an exclusive dinner event and immediately noticed the difference. Conversations stopped slightly when he approached. Not dramatically, still obvious. One businessman forced a smile. Another avoided eye contact completely. Across the room, the other woman looked irritated while checking her phone. You said this trip was supposed to help your image. Andrew looked toward her tiredly. Can we not do this tonight? She folded her arms. People are talking. Andrew. There it was. The thing he spent years building. Reputation. Image. Status. Admiration. Starting to crack, and somewhere across London. Diana quietly continued protecting herself and her daughter, with the same emotional discipline Andrew once admired most about her. Andrew's public collapse didn't happen all at once. That's what frightened him most. If disaster arrives suddenly, adrenaline carries you through it. But when everything slowly starts slipping apart piece by piece, you feel every second. The first investor withdrawal came quietly. A delayed partnership renewal, then another. Then several meetings suddenly postponed indefinitely. People who once responded within minutes now took days. Some stopped replying entirely. Andrew sat inside his office, overlooking Canary Wharf, while reading another carefully worded email from a major investor expressing concerns regarding financial transparency. His jaw tightened immediately. 3 years earlier, nobody questioned his stability publicly. Now uncertainty followed his name into every room. Across the desk, one executive cleared his throat awkwardly. We may need external review before the board meeting. Andrew looked up sharply. You think that's necessary? Tiny pause. The executive chose his next words carefully. I think confidence is weakening. Confidence. That was wealthy business language for people are preparing to abandon you. Andrew dismissed the meeting early afterward. The office suddenly felt suffocating. Glass walls, perfect skyline views, complete emotional isolation. He loosened his tie slowly before staring out across London. And honestly, for the first time in years, he felt small, not financially, personally, because somewhere beneath all the pressure and collapsing reputation, a brutal truth kept following him. He destroyed the only people who actually loved him before the rest of the world started walking away too. Meanwhile, the formal financial investigation quietly accelerated behind the scenes. Not dramatic police raids, not cinematic chaos, real corporate inquiry, document requests, internal audits, compliance reviews, investor scrutiny, legal examination. The dangerous kind, the kind that destroys reputations permanently among elite business circles. One rainy morning, Andrew arrived at headquarters and immediately sensed something wrong. Reception staff avoided eye contact. Conversations stopped when he entered elevators. People suddenly looked very busy around him. He stepped into a conference room where several senior partners already sat waiting. The atmosphere felt cold instantly, professional, emotionless. One older investor folded his hands carefully. "Andrew, we've identified serious reporting inconsistencies." Andrew remained standing. "I'm already reviewing them." Another executive responded immediately. "You should have reviewed them months ago." That sentence landed hard because everybody in the room knew it was true. Andrew's distraction had become visible long before the investigation started officially. Late responses, rushed approvals, ignored warnings, emotionally absent leadership. The exact same pattern that destroyed his marriage had quietly infected his company too. One investor slid paperwork across the table calmly. "Until this matter stabilizes, several parties are temporarily withdrawing involvement." Temporarily. Another wealthy business word people use when they're already halfway out the door. Andrew looked around the room, slowly. These same people once praised him constantly. Visionary, disciplined, brilliant, unstoppable. Now, nobody defended him. Nobody reassured him. Nobody even looked sympathetic. And suddenly Diana's voice echoed painfully inside his memory. "The old version of you would have caught this months ago." God, she was right. Outside the business world, the social shift became even uglier. Luxury invitations stopped arriving. Private dinners disappeared. People who once begged for Andrew's attention suddenly became difficult to reach. At one exclusive Mayfair restaurant, Andrew approached a group of wealthy acquaintances he'd known for years. One man smiled tightly, too tightly. "Andrew, didn't know you were coming tonight." Another checked his watch immediately afterward. A woman beside them offered polite sympathy. "Hope everything works itself out." That sentence translated clearly, "We heard the rumors." Andrew sat through dinner, barely hearing conversation around him. The wealthy world operates on perception, and once people smell instability, distance appears fast. Very fast. Meanwhile, the other woman's patience had started collapsing too. The luxury apartment no longer felt exciting when tension replaced admiration. One evening, she stood near the kitchen island, scrolling angrily through social media, while Andrew reviewed legal documents nearby. "People are literally posting articles about your company now." Andrew rubbed his forehead heavily. "I know. This is becoming embarrassing." Andrew looked up slowly. Interesting word. Embarrassing. Not painful. Not difficult. Embarrassing. Suddenly he saw the relationship clearly for the first time. Not love. Never love. Image. Excitement. Escape. That realization felt hollow. She continued pacing. "And why are we canceling Monaco again?" Andrew stared at her quietly. Exhausted now. Truly exhausted. "Because I'm trying to stop my company collapsing." She folded her arms immediately. "You said things were under control." Andrew almost laughed at that. Not humor. Pure disbelief at his own life. Because months ago he told himself the affair was under control. The separation was temporary. The business pressure was manageable. The family would eventually understand. Success protected him from consequences. Now, everything sat burning around him simultaneously. And the worst part? Nobody forced those choices onto him. Later that night, after another argument, the apartment felt painfully silent. The other woman slept facing away from him. Andrew sat alone near the windows drinking whiskey while rain covered the city outside. His phone remained unusually quiet now. No endless invitations. No admiring messages. No excitement. Just legal emails and investor concerns. He looked around the luxury apartment slowly. Expensive furniture. Perfect skyline. Zero warmth. And suddenly memories started attacking him mercilessly. Diana dancing barefoot in the kitchen, his daughter climbing into his lap during meetings, family cookouts in South London, bedtime stories, forehead kisses, laughter inside the penthouse, before silence replaced everything. That life once annoyed him because it felt emotionally demanding. Now it looked priceless. Across London, Diana sat beside her daughter helping with homework, while soup simmered gently in the kitchen. Simple evening, music playing softly, rain against the windows. Their daughter looked healthier lately. Still treatment schedules, still monitoring, still difficult days, but improving. Diana smiled, while correcting spelling mistakes gently. Their daughter groaned dramatically. "Why does English hate children?" Diana laughed softly. Honestly? Valid question. The little girl smiled proudly after finally spelling the word correctly. Warmth filled the apartment naturally again, not because life became perfect, because peace had slowly returned. Diana's phone buzzed quietly on the counter nearby. News notification. Andrew's company officially under public financial investigation. She stared at the screen several seconds. No smile, no satisfaction, just quiet sadness. Because despite everything, some part of her still remembered the man who once rocked their daughter to sleep at 3 a.m, terrified over a sneeze. That man existed once, which somehow made this collapse feel tragic instead of victorious. Meanwhile, Andrew finally understood the cruelest truth of all. The people he sacrificed his family for disappeared the second his money looked unstable. By the time the relationship finally started collapsing, Andrew was too exhausted to even fight for it properly. That was the irony. He destroyed his marriage chasing escape, only to end up emotionally trapped somewhere even colder. The luxury apartment in Canary Wharf no longer felt exciting. At first, it represented freedom. No hospital stress, no emotional conversations, no responsibility waiting at the dinner table, no tension hanging over family life. Now, it felt temporary, artificial, like a hotel room somebody accidentally stayed in too long. Rain touched the windows softly one Thursday evening, while Andrew sat at the kitchen island reviewing another wave of legal emails connected to the investigation. His tie hung loose around his neck. Half-finished whiskey rested nearby. The apartment remained unusually quiet. The other woman entered from the bedroom, adjusting jewelry while checking messages on her phone. She barely looked at him initially. That alone said enough. A few months ago, she constantly wanted attention, dinners, vacations, affection, photographs, excitement. Now, every interaction felt strained, transactional. She opened the fridge before speaking casually. "Are you still doing that investor dinner tomorrow?" Andrew rubbed tired eyes. "It got canceled." Tiny pause. "Then, again?" He nodded once. She shut the fridge slowly, not angry yet, calculating. Andrew noticed the shift immediately. People behave differently once your value starts dropping publicly. He understood that professionally for years. Experiencing it personally felt uglier. The other woman leaned against the counter, scrolling through social media. "People keep messaging me, asking about your company." Andrew stared down at the documents. "Ignore them. Easy for you to say." There it was again. That tone, not concern, annoyance. Like his problems had become inconvenient to her lifestyle. Andrew suddenly remembered Diana sitting beside hospital beds at 2 a.m, never once complaining about inconvenience. The comparison hit hard immediately. He pushed the thought away. The other woman continued talking. "Honestly, this whole thing is becoming stressful." Andrew almost laughed at that. Stressful. Interesting word. Because months earlier, Diana carried medical exhaustion, emotional abandonment, parenting pressure, marriage collapse, hospital trauma, while Andrew escaped into luxury, pretending he deserved relief. Now, one financial investigation had this woman emotionally exhausted already. Funny how quickly shallow loyalty disappears under pressure. Andrew leaned back heavily in the chair. "You can leave if it's too much." The room became quiet after that, not hostile, just emotionally revealing, because neither of them denied what the relationship really was anymore. The other woman crossed her arms. "Why are you acting like I'm the bad person here?" Andrew looked up slowly, and honestly, for the first time since the affair began, he looked emotionally awake, not defensive, not arrogant, just tired, deeply tired. "I don't think you're a bad person." Tiny pause. "Then, I think I used you to avoid my own life." That sentence sat heavily between them, because it was true. The affair was never built on emotional depth. It was built on escape. Andrew wanted admiration, distraction, ego, relief from responsibility. And now that reality was collapsing. There wasn't much left underneath. The other woman looked uncomfortable hearing honesty instead of excuses. She grabbed a glass of water before speaking carefully. "I didn't ask you to leave your family." Andrew looked away toward the rain-covered skyline. "No. I did that myself." For several seconds, nobody spoke. The city lights reflected softly through the windows, while distant traffic moved below. The apartment suddenly felt emotionally empty, in a way Andrew couldn't ignore anymore. Not peaceful empty, lonely empty. The other woman finally sat across from him quietly. "What happens if your company actually falls apart?" Andrew answered honestly. "I don't know." That frightened her immediately, because uncertainty destroys luxury relationships fast. No certainty, no status, no guaranteed future, just pressure. And pressure exposes people quickly. A week later, another investor withdrew publicly. News articles intensified. Industry rumors spread aggressively. Andrew stopped getting invited places almost entirely. The social silence became brutal. Meanwhile, the apartment atmosphere kept worsening. One evening, Andrew returned home carrying takeout containers, only to find several expensive suitcases near the doorway. He froze immediately. The other woman walked out from the bedroom, wearing a coat. No tears, no dramatic confrontation. Honestly, that made it worse. Andrew stared at the luggage. "You're leaving?" Not a question. She avoided eye contact briefly, while adjusting her purse strap. "I think it's better." Andrew stood there silently several seconds, and surprisingly, he didn't even feel anger first, just emptiness, because deep down he already knew this moment was coming. The other woman finally looked at him directly. "Things have changed." Andrew nearly smiled at that. Not amusement. Recognition. That exact sentence could describe his entire life now. He set the food containers down slowly. Was any of it real? She hesitated. That hesitation answered enough already. Still, she spoke carefully. "I cared about you." Tiny pause. Then the truth quietly arrived underneath it. "But this isn't the life I signed up for." There it was. Complete honesty at last. Not love. Lifestyle. Andrew nodded faintly. No argument. No begging. Because part of him finally understood he had traded genuine love for temporary admiration. And temporary admiration always expires eventually. The other woman picked up one suitcase carefully. Before leaving, she paused near the doorway, almost guilty now. "I hope things work out with your daughter." That sentence nearly crushed him, because even strangers now associated him more with failure as a father than success as a businessman. Andrew answered quietly, "Yeah." Then she left, just like that. No dramatic music, no screaming, no shattered glass, only silence. The apartment door clicked shut softly behind her, and suddenly, Andrew stood completely alone inside the life he created for himself. Rain moved against the windows, while untouched takeout cooled on the counter nearby. The apartment looked huge now, cold, emotionless. Andrew slowly sat down near the windows, staring out across London. And for the first time, in a very long time, there was nobody left to distract him from himself anymore. No parties, no admiration, no affair, no social protection, just consequences. His phone buzzed suddenly against the table. Hospital notification from Diana. Their daughter's condition had worsened again, overnight. Andrew stared at the message instantly, heart dropping hard into his stomach, and suddenly nothing else mattered anymore. Andrew drove through London like a man trying to outrun himself. Rain blurred across the windshield, while traffic lights reflected red and gold against wet streets. His hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly, heart racing, mind replaying Diana's message repeatedly. Their daughter's condition had worsened again, overnight. No details beyond that, just enough to terrify him. And honestly, fear felt different now. Before, Andrew always assumed there would still be time later. Time to apologize. Time to repair things. Time to become better. Time to show up properly. Now, nothing felt guaranteed anymore. By the time he reached the hospital, exhaustion already sat visibly across his face. Wrinkled shirt, unshaven jaw, eyes red from sleepless nights and stress. Nobody at reception treated him like an important businessman anymore. That change hit him immediately. No extra smiles, no recognition energy, just routine professionalism. He barely noticed. The pediatric floor smelled exactly the same as before. Disinfectant, stale coffee, exhaustion, fear. Hospital familiarity suddenly crushed him emotionally, because once upon a time, this place still felt connected to family. Now it felt connected to regret. Andrew moved quickly down the corridor until he spotted Diana sitting beside the hospital room doorway, holding paperwork against her chest. She looked exhausted too, but steadier than him emotionally, grounded. That difference mattered now. Diana looked up when he approached. No hostility, no warmth either, just quiet acknowledgement. Andrew's voice came out rough immediately. How bad is it? Diana stood slowly. The fever triggered complications again. Andrew's stomach tightened instantly. Why didn't you call sooner? The moment the words left his mouth, he regretted them, because Diana's expression changed slightly. Not anger, disbelief. Tiny shift, still devastating. She answered quietly, I did used to call sooner. God, that hurt. Because both of them immediately remembered the night he ignored her, repeatedly. Andrew looked away first. Shame moved visibly across his face now. Diana finally continued calmly. She stabilized this morning. Andrew nodded quickly, too quickly, almost desperate for relief. Can I see her? Diana studied him carefully several seconds before stepping aside silently. Andrew walked into the room slowly. Machines beeped softly nearby. Rain tapped gently against the windows. Their daughter lay curled beneath hospital blankets, looking smaller than he remembered. Children always look smaller in hospital beds. Andrew's chest tightened painfully. For a second, he simply stood there, staring at her. This little girl once ran through penthouse hallways in socks, screaming about cartoons and demanding pancakes at impossible hours. Now she looked tired, careful, fragile. Andrew moved closer slowly. Hey, Bug. Their daughter looked toward him. Tiny pause. Then hi. Not excitement, not anger, just politeness. And somehow that hurt worse than yelling ever could. Andrew sat carefully beside the bed. How are you feeling? She shrugged slightly beneath the blanket. Okay. Short answer. Quiet voice. No reaching for him. No immediate smile. The emotional distance became obvious instantly. Andrew tried again. I came as soon as I got the message. Their daughter nodded politely, then looked back toward the television mounted quietly across the room. Andrew stared at her profile, feeling something crack slowly inside his chest. Because children don't fake emotional withdrawal well. If they trust you, you feel it immediately. If they don't anymore, you feel that too. Andrew reached carefully for her hand. She let him hold it. Still, her fingers remained emotionally passive inside his. No squeezing back. No instinctive comfort, just tolerance. That nearly destroyed him. Several minutes passed awkwardly. Andrew kept trying, asking about cartoons, school, coloring books, treatment updates. Their daughter answered softly every time, but the warmth between them had changed noticeably. And for the first time, Andrew fully understood something horrifying. Repeated absence had taught his daughter how to emotionally live without expecting him anymore. That realization suffocated him. Eventually, the little girl asked quietly, Are you staying long? Andrew blinked immediately. What? She looked down at the blanket. You usually leave fast now. The room went painfully still. Andrew opened his mouth. Nothing came out immediately, because there was no defense against honesty spoken that simply. Children expose truth, accidentally sometimes. That's what makes it brutal. Andrew swallowed hard. I'm not leaving right now. Their daughter nodded faintly, still cautious, still emotionally careful around him now, like she no longer trusted promises automatically. Andrew looked toward the window quickly, because tears suddenly burned behind his eyes. Actual tears, not performative guilt, real heartbreak. Because finally, he could see the damage clearly. Not through Diana's disappointment, not through collapsing finances, not through public humiliation, through his daughter emotionally preparing herself not to rely on him anymore. Diana entered quietly carrying fresh water and medication notes. She immediately sensed the atmosphere. Andrew sat beside the bed, emotionally wrecked, trying desperately not to show it openly. Their daughter remained polite, but distant. The contrast hurt to witness. Diana adjusted the blanket gently. Instantly, their daughter relaxed slightly beneath her touch. Instinctive trust, instinctive safety. Andrew noticed immediately. Of course he noticed. And honestly, that difference shattered him more than losing money ever could. One nurse entered shortly afterward, discussing medication timing. While Diana listened carefully, asking questions, Andrew sat silently beside the bed, realizing something painfully obvious. Diana still knew every detail about their daughter's care, every medication, every symptom, every schedule, every emotional shift. Meanwhile, Andrew struggled just to remain consistently present. The nurse eventually left. Silence settled again. Then, unexpectedly, their daughter asked softly, Daddy? Andrew looked up immediately, hope flashing across his face too quickly. Yeah, Bug. The little girl hesitated briefly, then quietly asked, Are you gonna disappear again? That sentence broke him completely. Andrew lowered his head, instantly covering his mouth with trembling fingers. For several seconds, he physically couldn't speak, because deep down, he realized his daughter no longer feared illness most. She feared abandonment, and he caused that. Not accidentally, repeatedly. Diana stood silently near the window, watching Andrew collapse emotionally in front of the hospital bed. And honestly, part of her still hurt, seeing it. Not because she wanted him back, because once upon a time, Andrew loved that little girl so fiercely, it used to make Diana emotional watching them together. Now look at them. A child learning emotional caution. A father learning consequences. Too late. Andrew finally looked up toward his daughter again. Eyes wet now. Voice unsteady. I'm so sorry. The little girl stared at him quietly. Then, after several seconds, she simply nodded. Not forgiveness. Not rejection. Something sadder. Like she wanted to believe him, but didn't fully know how anymore. That evening, rain covered London again, soft at first, then heavier as darkness settled across the city. Inside the hospital room, their daughter finally fell asleep after medication left her exhausted and quiet. The monitors beeped steadily beside the bed, while warm hallway light spilled softly through the partially open door. Andrew sat beside the chair for a long time, watching her sleep, not checking his phone, not distracted, just watching, actually present for once. And somehow that made the guilt worse, because now he fully understood what Diana carried alone for months. Fear, exhaustion, helplessness, emotional pressure, endless uncertainty. No wonder she looked tired all the time. No wonder she stopped laughing the same way eventually. Andrew rubbed both hands slowly over his face. Across the room, Diana quietly organized medication paperwork into her bag, still calm, still composed. That emotional steadiness used to comfort Andrew once. Now it exposed him painfully. Eventually, Diana looked toward the sleeping child, then softly toward Andrew. Come outside for a minute. Andrew nodded immediately. They stepped quietly into the hallway, while nurses moved calmly through the pediatric floor nearby. The hospital cafe down the corridor had nearly emptied for the night. Rain pressed softly against the windows overlooking the city. For a few seconds, neither spoke. The silence between them no longer felt angry, just finished. Andrew leaned against the wall heavily. Exhaustion covered him completely now. Not businessman exhaustion, human exhaustion. The kind that appears after somebody finally stops lying to themselves. Diana stood with arms folded loosely against her coat, not defensive, grounded. Andrew looked at her carefully, really looked at her for the first time in months. No glamorous gala lighting, no polished social performance, just Diana. Tired eyes, emotional strength, quiet dignity, steady composure. And suddenly he remembered the fundraiser years ago when she first told him, "Money is helpful, but children remember kindness longer." God. She tried warning him about who he was becoming long before he destroyed everything. Andrew swallowed hard. I don't even recognize myself anymore. Diana didn't answer immediately, because honestly, she believed him. That was part of the tragedy. Andrew wasn't born heartless. He became emotionally corrupted slowly. Ego, status, distraction, avoidance, arrogance. Small, selfish decisions, repeated enough times, eventually changed him completely. Andrew looked down the hallway toward his daughter's room, voice quieter now. I hurt her. Not a question, not denial. Truth. Diana nodded once, not cruelly, just honestly. Andrew closed his eyes briefly. Rain hit harder against the windows now. For a second, neither moved. Then Andrew finally asked the question, sitting underneath everything. Do you hate me? Diana looked at him carefully, and honestly, that question sounded less like self-pity and more like genuine fear. She answered softly, no. Andrew looked surprised. Diana continued calmly. I think you lost yourself, trying to become somebody the world would admire. Tiny pause. Then, and somewhere along the way, you stopped protecting the people who already loved you. That sentence settled deeply into him, because it was true. Andrew spent years chasing status, wealth, validation, image, while slowly neglecting the only people who loved him without needing performance. He rubbed trembling hands together slowly, voice rough now. I thought providing was enough. Diana's expression softened slightly, not romantically, humanly. Providing matters. Then she looked directly at him, and the next words changed him permanently. But a father isn't measured by money. Andrew's breathing slowed. Diana continued quietly, controlled. No anger, only truth. A father is measured by who stays when life becomes difficult. Silence. Real silence. The kind that reaches directly into somebody's chest and stays there. Andrew looked away immediately, because emotion hit him too hard all at once. Hospital memories flooded back violently. Missed appointments, ignored calls, canceled visits, distracted conversations, his daughter asking if she'd been forgotten. Diana sitting alone through terrifying nights while he escaped into luxury and ego. Every selfish choice suddenly looked disgusting through the eyes of fatherhood. Andrew covered his mouth briefly, trying to steady himself. But emotion finally broke through anyway. Tears. Quiet ones. Ashamed ones. The kind emotionally distant men spend years avoiding. Diana watched silently. Not triumphant, not satisfied, because despite everything, watching somebody collapse under the weight of their own failures is rarely beautiful in real life. Mostly it's sad. Andrew finally spoke again, barely above a whisper. I don't know how to fix this. Diana looked toward the hospital room, where their daughter slept peacefully for the first time all day. Then back at Andrew. Some things don't fully go back to what they were. That truth hurt, because both of them knew she wasn't only talking about marriage. Trust changes after repeated abandonment, especially for children. Andrew leaned heavily against the wall, completely stripped now. No status, no performance, no control, no distractions, just consequence. And for the first time in his life, he finally understood what real failure looked like. Not losing money, not losing reputation, losing emotional access to the people you love because you stopped showing up for them when it mattered most. Diana adjusted her coat quietly. You can still be a better father moving forward. Andrew looked up immediately. Tiny hope, fragile hope. Diana's expression remained steady, but that requires consistency. Tiny pause, and then, not guilt. That line hit hard too, because guilt feels emotional, but consistency requires discipline. And Andrew spent months choosing comfort over discipline repeatedly. Down the hallway, one of the nurses stepped quietly into their daughter's room, checking monitors softly. Hospital sounds echoed faintly around them. Rain continued outside. London moved normally beyond the windows, while two people stood inside the ruins of a marriage neither fully imagined destroying years earlier. Andrew finally nodded slowly. Not dramatic redemption, not instant transformation. Just painful understanding. Diana looked at him one last time, before speaking softly. Our daughter still loves you. Andrew's eyes filled again, immediately. Diana continued carefully. Don't make her regret that. Then she turned and walked calmly back toward the hospital room. Andrew remained alone in the hallway afterward, staring through rain-covered windows while the weight of everything finally settled fully onto him. And honestly, no punishment the legal system could ever create would hurt more than realizing too late that the people who loved you most were the very people you abandoned first. 3 months later, the divorce finalized on a cold, rainy morning in London. No dramatic courtroom speeches, no screaming, no revenge performance, just signatures, consequences. The courthouse hallway smelled faintly like wet coats and old paperwork, while quiet footsteps echoed across polished floors. Outside, people hurried beneath umbrellas trying to escape the weather. Inside, Andrew sat alone near one of the benches, adjusting the sleeve of a dark coat he'd owned for years. He looked different now. Not ruined physically, reduced emotionally, quieter. The sharp confidence that once filled every room around him had faded into something heavier. Humility, maybe, or regret, probably both. Across the hallway, Diana arrived carrying a folder against her chest while speaking softly with her solicitor. Professional, composed. Simple dark coat, minimal makeup, no performance, no visible bitterness. And honestly, that calmness still unsettled Andrew sometimes, because despite everything he put her through, Diana refused to become cruel. Their daughter stayed at school that morning. Diana intentionally wanted her protected from adult, legal atmosphere. The child's health had slowly improved over recent months, not magically cured, still monitored. Still careful, still ongoing treatment, but stronger now. More laughter returning, more energy, more life. That mattered most. Andrew looked toward Diana carefully as she approached. For a second, memories hit him painfully again. Hospital volunteering, rainy London walks, kitchen dancing, family dinners in South London, slow dancing at midnight while music played softly through the apartment. That life once felt permanent. Now it existed only in memory. Diana noticed him watching her. She offered a polite nod. Nothing more. No hatred. No intimacy either. Just acceptance. The legal process itself passed quietly. Property agreements, custody, structure, financial arrangements, measured adult conversations spoken through tired professionalism. At one point, the solicitor asked whether both parties agreed fully to the final terms. Andrew answered first, yes. His voice sounded rougher these days, less polished. Diana answered calmly afterward, I agree. And just like that, years of marriage officially ended inside a room that felt emotionally smaller than their history deserved. Afterward, they stepped back into the courthouse hallway together. Rain still covered the city outside. Neither moved immediately. Finally, Andrew spoke softly. Thank you. Diana looked at him briefly. For what? Andrew exhaled slowly. Because honestly, there were too many answers now. For protecting their daughter, for surviving him, for not destroying him publicly when she easily could have, for telling the truth instead of seeking revenge. He settled on honesty, for being stronger than I deserved. Diana's expression shifted slightly. Tiny sadness, tiny recognition. Then she answered quietly, I didn't become strong because I wanted to. That sentence stayed with him, because suffering forces growth people never ask for. Outside the courthouse, rain tapped steadily against black umbrellas, while traffic crawled through wet London streets. Andrew and Diana stood beneath the entrance overhang briefly before separating toward different directions. Different lives now. No dramatic goodbye, no final embrace. Some endings happen quietly, after people run out of ways to hurt each other. Diana walked toward the street calmly, and for the first time in years, she felt emotionally light. Not happy, exactly. Healing. There's a difference. A few weeks later, life inside the penthouse felt peaceful again, in ways Diana once thought impossible. Not luxurious peace, real peace, the kind built slowly through emotional stability. Music returned regularly, soft soul music while cooking, laughter during homework, television noise on rainy evenings. Their daughter looked healthier too, color returning gradually to her face, more playful energy, more stubbornness. Diana welcomed every dramatic complaint about vegetables like a miracle. One evening, they sat together on the couch wrapped beneath blankets, while rain touched the windows softly. Their daughter leaned against Diana sleepily. Mummy? Yeah? Are we okay now? Diana looked down at her carefully. Children ask enormous questions in tiny voices sometimes. She brushed curls gently away from the little girl's forehead, then answered honestly, We're getting there. Their daughter nodded thoughtfully, then whispered, I like when the house feels calm. Diana nearly cried hearing that, because children should associate home with peace automatically, not tension, not emotional uncertainty, peace. Later that night, after her daughter fell asleep, Diana stood near the windows overlooking London with tea warming her hands. The city glowed softly beneath rain and distant traffic. Her consulting career continued growing steadily now. Not billionaire success, not glamorous wealth, purpose, respect, stability. People trusted her professionally because she carried herself with quiet competence and emotional intelligence. And most importantly, she trusted herself again too. Meanwhile, Andrew's life looked entirely different now. The luxury apartment was gone. The endless social invitations disappeared months earlier. The investigation damaged both his finances and reputation heavily, even after legal restructuring prevented complete destruction. He still worked, still rebuilt professionally, where possible. But the world no longer treated him like untouchable success, walking in a designer suit. And honestly, that humbled him permanently. One rainy evening, Andrew sat alone inside a much smaller apartment reviewing paperwork, while soft jazz played quietly nearby. No glamorous skyline, no expensive parties, no admiration, just silence, real silence. Family photographs sat near the shelf, his daughter smiling during recovery. Diana laughing during some old family cookout. One blurry kitchen picture their daughter took years ago where Andrew danced terribly, while Diana nearly collapsed laughing beside him. Andrew stared at that photo longest, because looking back now, those ordinary moments were the richest parts of his life, and he almost traded them away permanently chasing status that disappeared the second things became difficult. His phone buzzed softly. Photo from Diana, their daughter proudly holding a school art certificate. Simple message underneath. She wanted to show you. Andrew stared at the image quietly for several seconds, then smiled painfully to himself. Because, despite everything, Diana still protected their daughter's relationship with him carefully. Not for him, for the child. That maturity humbled him deeply. Andrew typed slowly. Tell her I'm proud of her. A few moments later, another message appeared. Tell her yourself. She's awake. Andrew immediately pressed call, and somewhere across London, a little girl answered excitedly, Daddy, guess what? Andrew leaned back slowly in the chair, listening to her voice fill the quiet apartment. And honestly, that small moment meant more to him now than every luxury event, business award, or elite invitation he once spent years chasing. Because Andrew finally understood something life had tried teaching him repeatedly. Success without love is just expensive loneliness. And in the end, the most expensive thing he ever lost was the family that once loved him for free. If this story touched you in any way, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share Mr. George Stories. And tell me in the comments, do you believe people like Andrew truly change after losing everything? Or do some lessons come too late?